Okay. Hold on. I think... Have we got it? Have we got it? Okay. It looks like we got it this time. Alright. Here. Throw it up here. We'll all look at my beautiful face. Alright. Yeah. Don't know what. Like I said, it was working in OBS, and then I went to go start the stream, and then the camera suddenly not working. So, fun. Fun times. Yeah, plugging in. Plugging it back in, taking it out, and putting it back in did not work. So we turned it off and back on, and that did work. The wonders of IT troubleshooting, I suppose. I'm gonna restart stuff. I wasn't planning to restart. Okay. Let's. That. Okay, there we go. Perfect. There we are. How things go for you guys? You guys doing alright? Doing okay. So, now that the stream is gonna work correctly, apparently. Get that started. Just scramble real quick and do the things that I had set up for the other stream. The first one. And here we go. We're gonna set that up. Ba-bum. Ba-da-bum. Alright, perfect. Let's do that. Let's do this. No. No, not doing that. Okay. Are we... Doing well, we're doing well. Okay. I believe we're ready. After a minute. After a minute, I think we're ready now. So yeah, we're gonna start the stream. Again, this is strangely gonna turn into a part 3. Again, didn't think it would nearly take this long, but I never think it will take that long, so, you know, I guess, you know, what do I know? Apparently not how long things will take to talk through on stream. You'd think I'd learn it after this point, but I haven't learned that lesson yet. Last little thing to set up. Okay, there we go. I think we should be good. All right. So before we jump in, let's talk about. So this is a TTRPG channel, so let's talk about some TTRPG stuff. Primarily, what I've been doing when I haven't been here. So first. Let's see. In the last week, we played some D&D. My campaign that I run, we kicked off. We were still in the middle of the festival. Kicked off the festival, did all that stuff. Lots of fun. I forget how snappy. Usually, I thought the festival was going to take us, you know, a little bit longer, but they're through most of the festival already. I forget how snappy it is when you have a player missing, or we just exited a player, so. Number of players shrunk by 1, so from 4 to 3, and how quickly that extra person gone like speeds up things. How much more stuff that people get through when there's not. When you lose, I guess, 25% of the people who want to do stuff and need to talk about things. Really speeds things up. So we did that. We got in the festival. I think probably in our next stream, maybe the stream after, depending on how things go. I'll talk about festivals and running them in games and how much fun it was and what I did right and what I didn't do right and all that fun stuff. So we'll definitely go over that, I think, either next time or the time after. And I can show you, we had a bunch of like events for things, we had people to meet, we had things going on for all the player characters. Try to make sure that every player character has like some sort of highlight moment, some a new NPC to talk to, or a specific item to kind of go after, or some sort of event that's kind of keyed specifically for them. They can step up and kind of shine at, trying to get those spotlight moments for all our players out there. So trying to do that, we'll talk about that, talk about some of the how I set it up, the competition in it, and the NPCs. It's the our rogues gallery for the festival who's working against them as competitors, and that kind of setting up the festival and how it's tied to the religion itself and things going on in the world. That'll be for next time. But yeah, that was D&D. D&D went really well. The festival was really enjoyable. The players really liked it, so that all worked out really, really well. And I'm not surprised by that. I think it's very easy. We've been teasing the festival since the very beginning of the campaign, and so finally in session 20 we get to it. Again, it's one of those strange things when you start the time dilation that happens with something running a TTRPG like D&D or anything like that. You jump in there and you see the time dilation and be like, oh, this is taking us like months and months to get to, but in universe it's been like 2 weeks. So your players, we talk about the festival all the time, but for your player characters, yeah, they're like, yeah, it's coming up. It's like being like, oh, well, I guess at this point, our closest holiday, at least in the US, is Halloween, which is a month away. At time of doing the stream, at least. So being like, oh yeah, it's a few weeks away. And you'll see things sort of like ramp up to that. And I tried to do that in universe, be like, oh, you see people moving around. There's a lot more people in the town than there usually are because people come in for the festival. It's really hard to find lodging, and there's a bunch of inflation on prices and stuff because there's a big demand for all those things. So the prices have really changed around things, and played up some of that as well. As well as they had the mercenary guards who were in the city. They were in the city earlier, but they're primarily there only because of the festival. They're there as sort of like hired security for the festival and for the town, who usually doesn't have this many people here within the town itself. So they don't really have the capacity to keep law and order in there. So they hired some mercenaries to come in. Very sort of, for those who have played either Baldur's Gate 3 or are familiar with D&D in the Forgotten Realms, know that like the Flaming Fist aspect of it and bring that in. So very similar, except that these guys are fully mercenary, and after the festival's gone, they're gonna move on to whatever their next money-making enterprise will be at that point. Hey, what's up, Cosmaster? Doing well? Jumping in? Getting up to it? So yeah, that was my Friday game. So the Friday game went really well. And usually we'd have a Sunday game, but our DM has got their schedule kind of moved around. Had to do some more on-call work than they were expecting. So that kind of screwed up their schedule. We played online on a Wednesday night. Went really good. So that's the one I'm a player in rather than running. And the whole session was good. We did some sailing. Basically, we moved from one location to the other using ship, and then did some stuff when we got there. So getting back on the ship was always nice. This is it started off as a Saltmarsh campaign, and has, of course, spiraled into being nothing about the secrets of Saltmarsh, kind of any of that stuff. We have not been back to Saltmarsh. We did like one of the opening adventures in Saltmarsh, and we're like, thanks for the ship, see you later. Never went back. We went close to Saltmarsh once, and that's about it. I had to talk to some lizard folk who are nearby. In one of the adventures, I believe. In the marsh. But we didn't do that. So, we haven't been back there yet. Mainly because we kind of maybe stole a ship. And so that's, usually frowned upon by people. So we haven't been back there. So we were on the ship, we were moving from, so much of this campaign has been underwater. We moved from the Tridents area, and we're moving back to the Sea Elves area, which is also underwater. So it was sort of like, come up out of this civilization, get on the ship, travel over here, go back under the waves into this other civilization, do that. Now, the Manon Enclave, which is the Sea Elves, are, they've been there for, they were the previous adventure that our player characters did. So we did that, then we moved on to the Tridents, and we come back. So it was very much this big victory lap. Kind of see the fruits of our labors there. Yes, boat thieves. We've been terrible boat thieves. It's funny. So the adventure that's set up there is in Saltmarsh. It's the haunted house adventure that's in there. And there's a smuggler ship, and they want you to stop we get hired by the Council of Saltmarsh to deal with that and be like, okay, we asked them if we could have the ship, and they were like, well, no, you can't have the ship. And they wanted to pay us a very low amount of gold, and we're like, all right, we're just gonna take the ship. They're smugglers, so they're not like bad people, or they're not like good people. They're not great people. So we're going to, just kick them off their ship and take their ship, because the ship's worth a lot more than the paltry amount of gold the Council of Saltmarsh was going to offer us to, steal a ship for them, basically, and all the smuggled goods within, which we also took those too. We didn't leave those behind. We took those as well. And we were like, oh, well, what will happen is, like, if anybody ever figures out about it, of course, we went and immediately changed the name of the ship and did all the stuff you usually do. I was like, if anybody ever asks us about it, we'll just be like, oh, we fought them, but they captured us. And I think we're level 1 or 2 at that point. I can't remember where we started off the campaign. I think we started at level 1. So I think we're level 1 PCs. And we're like, okay, I mean, there's a high likelihood that we would not do very well at this adventure, trying to assault a ship and take it. But we did, and then we were just like, oh, if anybody ever asks us about it, if it ever comes up later, we'll just be like, oh, we got captured and they took us on the ship, and it took us a long time to break free and come back. But, it hasn't come out because we haven't gone back to Saltmarsh. But going back to the Sea Elves, we came back and it was very much sort of like a victory lap episode, or session, if you want to call it that. Either way. So we came back, we were like, oh, here's all the NPCs, we did the glad handing, talked to NPCs, oh, things with the city are doing so well because of all the stuff we did before, and things were really, really bad before. Doing that, and we have a meeting with the sort of the leader and the council of the coalition that we founded. This ended up being a very strangely political game that we didn't know it was going to be very political when we started out, and then immediately became very political. So we were founding a sea coalition that we have dubbed it, essentially, we're playing D&D. We formed D&D NATO is what we did. We formed D&D NATO. That was definitely, I feel very confident in saying that was not the intended direction for the campaign in the beginning, but that is definitely what we ended on. And once we kind of got that scenario hook into us, we haven't let it go. So we're running around this sort of like sea, talking to all the people there that share a common enemy and trying to get them all on board with each other. And so that was fun. And that was it. So we met a whole bunch of old people, or old NPCs that we're familiar with, see how things have gotten better. We did a big report. They gave us some reports about stuff, how things are going with the big war that's going on. And do a little bit of here and there, and talk about what's coming up next, and enemy movements. And they're moving into the Trident Trench, and we got to get there quick and figure out what's going to do, because we've got a whole bunch of different factions that are vying to get their hands on a Kraken, which is bad news. Very bad news for everybody. So yeah, that's that campaign. Lots of wheels, very fun campaign though. So that brings us to what we're going to talk about today, which is going to be our steamrolled encounters. I'm going to go ahead and throw it over. We'll take a look at it. Bam! There we go. Pulled up. I didn't have to reset it. It pulled up the document just fine. So this is technically, like I said earlier, part 3. So we'll just go over the first parts real quick, just so everybody's on the same page, in case you haven't seen those two. What are you doing? Go watch those two. If you haven't seen those two, though, it's going to be weird using this as number 1, but it'll still be useful, even if you haven't watched that stuff. So we're talking about kind of upgrading D&D encounters, and we're talking specifically about D&D 5e 2024, but this information will be super useful for whatever TTRPG system you're running. If you feel like you need to put some more teeth into your combats, this will help with that. So here's our combat encounter setup, just so we had sort of like a broad format as to the language we're going to talk about, and the sort of primary combat example we're going to talk about. So we're talking about a 4th level party of PCs. That's our standard composition. We're doing fighter, cleric, rogue, wizard. Doing that. Wizard. Just our base standard adventuring party. 4th level is a good one because it's at the top of the first tier, but also we don't have to go into discussing like multi-attacks and stuff like that, even though we did talk about that stuff. But the higher in level we get, the wonkier basically anything in D&D 5e 2024 gets. So we're using this as a nice, like, they're not first level characters. They got some hit points on them. They got some resources on them. But this is right before Fireball becomes the solution to everything, and every fighter gets multi-attack and all that fun stuff. We decided we're going to set this in a classic cave system dungeon room filled with a lovely, lovely goblinoids. So that very classic, iconic, tropey D&D kind of setting. You go into a cave, there's some goblins in those caves. Probably going to be a fight that breaks out. Let's set us up. And so in our first one, we talked about the opposition. It's all about monsters and what they're doing. It's about the party level, challenge rating, and adventure tier, and taking those into consideration. Adventure tier, again, when you cross adventure tiers, things get weird. So we have that 4th level party. We start throwing CR 5 and higher monsters at them. Things start to get wonky because the challenge rating is different. They have different proficiency bonuses. They have different number of attacks per round. Things can get really wonky very quickly. So it's very important to kind of keep that in check. We talked about odds and action economy. Action economy, of course, deals with how many attacks they're going to be, how many opportunities they have basically to damage each other in a round of combat. Because specifically in 5e in 2024, the more action economy you have, the more likely it is you're going to be successful in the combat. And like I said, this is usually where most of the dungeon masters stop. They do, okay, we got something that's for the right party level, and it's roughly has the same amount of odds in it in action economy. That's where most dungeon masters kind of stop. Not your fault. I don't think that the 5e 2024 DMGs do a very good job of telling you how to make encounters. They kind of like basically point you towards D&D Beyond and be like, use the encounter generator, the encounter builder, and that's about it, rather than tell you how and why you do certain things when you're building combat. So once you get beyond that base level, which is basically anything you could plug into an encounter builder, you get into things like tactics and strategy, reviewing the stat blocks for their abilities, their actions, their traits that they use, finding a mix of monsters that kind of synergize with each other. So having a monster that's be like, oh, this monster grapples people or something like that. No, let's not use grapple. This monster creates some sort of difficult terrain. Be like, okay, what is a monster that could go with that would be able to make good use of like AoEs, because your party's gonna be probably closer, stuck, clumped up more because they can't move as much. Or has some sort of effect that they would want to run away from, whether that's an aura or some sort of like, maybe they have like a lashing thing that pulls them back into the difficult terrain, anything like that. We talked about, these were from the 4th edition DMG, which I think is probably, I personally find it's the best DMG that D&D has ever put out that I'm aware of. But it's a really good one. It's really good because it gives you lots of nuts and bolts about running stuff, like these right here, which are, they give you these ideas for templates for encounter groups. So battlefield control, which is basically having a caster that can move the battlefield and do things like that, force movement, grappling, that kind of stuff. And putting them together with skirmishers, which are people that run around and attack. You can think of skirmishers as like your bog standard kind of monster. They just run up, they do some hits, normal stuff. Commander and troops, which is basically having a leader on their side, which would be like having a bard or a cleric, somebody who gives them buffs. And troops that they kind of lord over. Dragon's Den, or your solo layer. We talked about layers and legendary actions and resistances. I'm not a super fan of that. I'm not sure that I love that design. Well, I don't have to weasel on that. I don't love that design. I don't think that the layer legendary actions and resistances were a good idea for 5e 2024. I think when you have an ability that your players do things like cast spells and your monsters fail saves and then they're just like, I just pass it. I don't think that's fun. I don't think that's particularly fun. To just be able to hand wave stuff away like that and be like, okay, then there was no point to rolling the dice in the first part. It also means that, like, basically you have casters who don't use high levels. proficiently at the end of this, after you play a bunch, what ends up happening is that when you have casters, anybody who does casts or spells or has like Stunning Strike or anything like that, they're just like, well, I'm not going to use my super useful, super potent abilities until like round 3 once we chew through all the legendary resistances. So it just makes D&D combat longer and slower than it already is, which is pretty long and slow. So doing that sort of stuff. Oh, you love the layer actions, but it really depends on the ship. I guess that's true. Layer would actually be the thing that I probably don't lump in there. Layer actions are fine. Layer actions serve a purpose, and I like that. I think I take most issues with the legendary resistances. Legendary actions are fine too, actually. I just don't think they're implemented in the way, because really what they're trying to do is they're trying to even the action economy with that, with legendary actions and layer actions for solo monsters, instead of the solo monster basically getting one turn where either they hit and do a bunch of damage or don't hit and don't do anything. And so trying to give them those extra actions and the layer actions is how they did the workaround for that. I just think there's probably a better design way to do that. I know that one of the design things I do is I just give them extra turns in combat and then reduce how much damage they do on a hit or on their specific abilities. And so when you fight something like a dragon, instead of the dragon having one turn, the dragon has like 4 or 5 turns. And they're just peppered throughout the initiative list. And so they always have an ability to keep acting. They're just feel like they do a whole bunch in combat, rather than the PCs do a whole bunch and they sit there and then maybe they get to do something on their turn. And double line, which is melee and range, we talked about that. Wolf Park, that should be Wolf Pack. Wolf Pack / Horde. Wolf Pack, there we go. The Wolf Park. I took my dog to the Wolf Park. I didn't have a dog when we left. The wolves got him. Yeah, that's when you just throw a whole bunch of the same kind of monster at them. This is kind of the standard that we kind of go with 2024 and 5e as it's written. They're just like, oh, you fight 10 goblins. Now, we talked about this when we went through that, is that especially with the 2024 rules and how they changed CR and the XP budgets, just tweaked it a little bit. It really actually changed a whole bunch. We talked about having that instance where it's be like, oh, this level 4 party should be able to fight 30 goblins. I also don't want to run a combat where there are 30 goblins. Also, that really F's up the action economy. Like, those goblins are going to do a lot of damage, especially if you don't have somebody, especially a group at 4th level, because that means that wizard doesn't have things like Fireball that could really deck clear the encounter they don't have a lot of crowd control when they're low levels like that. So, again, we could spend all day talking about things that we already know, which is that 5e 2024's encounter/CR system doesn't work very well. And we know that. A Chihuahua wolf pack. Yeah, that's like, do you want to fight a horse-sized duck or a swarm of tiny horses? Which one do you want to fight? And we have synergy with the environment, which we talked about. It's just putting monsters that work in the environment that can be beneficial, that can take hiding monsters that take advantage of rooms that don't have light in it, spiders that crawl on the walls, those kind of things. And giving them those sorts of abilities, having monsters that swim and having water in the encounter, whether that's like an underground river or a big lake or anything like that. And readiness, which is a thing that often doesn't get talked about. Monsters aren't always just standing at attention with their full armor on and all their weapons out. Sometimes they ambush the party, sometimes they get ambushed, sometimes they're relaxing so they don't have their gear on. And where they are at the start of the battle, if they're all together having a conversation and you walk in and you go, fireball. And you just kill them all in one turn because they're all standing next to each other. Or if they're all spread out. We talked morale. Of course, if you want to see the morale stuff in action, I have the solo series, and you can see me use morale a lot because I really like the morale system. And I really think it's something we should add more into D&D because I think it's extremely useful. It's primarily useful, the morale system's extremely useful at cutting off combats. when you get into rounds 3 and 4 and you're like, oh, the combat's kind of a slog now, it's usually pretty clear that the player characters are going to win, and being able to find a way to exit combat, which is generally just your guys running away. Just let the monsters run away. They're fine. They can run away. Exceptions to that include things like constructs or undead that have no sense of self-preservation, as well as really, really dedicated zealots who will just throw themselves at the PCs in a fervor and have to be cut down. Those sorts of things. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, like, your bandits, your goblins are absolutely going to run away. They should be running away all the time and really, like, play up that sort of, like, goblin cowardly angle. And remember that every time they run away, they can also come back in later combats or in different areas, or they can stumble across the goblins again. The goblins can go warn people that the PCs are here. Adventurers are here. And do that sort of stuff. And there are alternative goals, like changing the goals of combat that's not just like, I kill them, they kill me. Whether you're trying to get information out of somebody, you're just trying to get through the room. We talked about that at the Cool Encounter. Your monsters are here to steal gear and supplies from the PCs. Or, you know, you have your PCs that are trying to escort somebody who's not a combatant. And all the monsters want to get that person. So changing that dynamic goals of what people are doing in the combat and why. Morale, something you've loved since 2E. I still make those checks at 5E. Yeah. Yeah, no, I really enjoy morale. I think it's especially using... So I have the solo play thing, and one of the things that's really, really difficult for, especially 5E 2024, is, as it is in, well, any edition of D&D, is trying to run with just 1 or 2 characters. It's really easy to get overloaded really quickly, or make combat just a slog when people just start missing. And it's just back... I roll, and I missed. You move over the monster. I rolled, I missed, and that back and forth can go. A couple of turns, real quickly, chew up a bunch of turns, and nothing feels like it's happening. Morale's a good way to sort of like ensure that somebody's doing something, whether they are trying to press you into running away or they run away themselves. It's also just the style of game that I typically run. Is that there are plenty of circumstances, and I make sure to tell my players when I'm running. Like the world's not necessarily level appropriate. You can walk into an area that's got really tough monsters in it, and you should recognize that. And running away is always an option. You should always run away. And I just told my players straight up in this campaign that I'm running, be like, I'm not going to punish you if you run away. Like, the monsters aren't going to chase you down and kill you. I just told them straight up. It'd just be like, if you decide to run and you make it outside of the bounding box that we're considering the combat area, you're free. You do the Final Fantasy retreat escape thing. Is like, you're just gone. You're out of the encounter. Don't worry about it. Now, are they going to be looking for you? If you're in this cavern system with goblins, yeah, they're absolutely going to start looking for you. So then it just starts steamrolling into the next encounter, and now you know what the next encounter is. It's like, oh, you guys are trying to run away and trying to hide and regroup. And do something like that. It's like, okay, that's your pass without a trace. We're all going to make group stealth checks. And then, it'll do a scene in which the goblins are looking around hunting you. Maybe if they have a warg or something like that, they're trying to pick up your trail and hunt you down with the dogs. But that's also just me, because my monsters are nasty, nasty people, and they want to kill you very badly and take your things. Because probably the average player character has a lot more money on their person, both coin and gear, than most targets the goblins might come across as far as killing and looting. So, yeah. That was Battlefield Environment. Non-hit point combat dangers. So that was... Oh, no, we didn't talk about this at all. So the second thing, our second stream, we're going to go over it. I know, I said quickly, but we're not doing it very quickly. It's fine. It's just a little catch-up. Battlefield environments. So you're starting encounter distance. That's something that we don't talk about a lot in 5e 2024. Basically, everybody starts within... basically this band. Either you're within right on somebody, or you're within a move of them, or you're within basically a dash of them. Most of this is very practical. It makes sense for a lot of indoor spaces, but it doesn't have to be that way, especially once you get in things like cave systems. It's like you can have massive cave rooms. And it's very fun to, especially in the overland aspect, like out in the wilderness, be like, use these ranges. Let somebody show off that longbow that can fire 600 feet at a far range and be like, okay, you see some guys on the crest of the hill. They look like we're using goblins, so they're hobgoblin raiders. And be like, okay, cool. They're within 600 feet. I'm going to start shooting my bow at them and make them come to me. And yeah, they get a bunch of free rounds of firing at disadvantage, and then they move into not having disadvantage. And then they get close, and people are able to do all their normal stuff once they get into melee and thrown range. And that's a cool, very different way to set up combat that doesn't get used a lot, is to really use that distancing and how you play with it. So again, if we had those hobgoblins on the rise, and those hobgoblins have longbows, they're probably going to sit at the top of that rise at that 600 foot, and they're like, well, we'll just take disadvantage shots at the player characters and force them to come to us. Because really at that point, probably only the wizard can hit them with something like magic missile, or if anybody has a longbow, they can exchange fire. But your barbarian that has javelins, they ain't doing anything. Your monk, not doing anything. Most fighters generally don't have a nice missile ranged weapon if they're strength fighters. Not doing anything. Even a bunch of your casters don't have anything that can reach out there. It's only really things like magic missile, which are like sight based. Otherwise you gotta get into this range, which is all long. That's humping it a long way, which means that the hobgoblins get a bunch of shots at you before you get into even missile range for things like short bows and Eldritch Blast and stuff like that. Firebolt. Battlefield size and shape. Moving it around. Figuring out, can the group spread out? Can they get around? Where can they move? Lets you focus on how potent do you want ranged combat to be in this? Do you want them to be able to get into an area where they're going to have lots of cover and high ground and be able to be protected, and it's really tough for melee characters to get to them, to deal with them, so they can do that? Or you want to set up a bunch of open areas where it's very close quarters and there's not really anything to use range with, and get them in the spot where they have to use that do like disadvantage to firing at people right next to them and things like that. Especially ammunition, throwables, yeah. Using things like fire pots, grenades, alchemist, fire, acid flasks, those sorts of things. Put some different stuff in there. Make it fun. Have your monsters have throwables. In the campaign I'm playing in right now, I said it was an underwater campaign. There were some bad guys that will occasionally hit us with some lightning grenades. They're really nasty. They work really well underwater too. So it's not a good time for us. But at the same time, also have characters pick up their haversack of lightning grenades after they've killed one, and then prime one and chuck the whole thing at a bad guy and let them all go off. So, reward that clever play with players and be like, oh, they do the thing. That's a cool thing. They use the thing that was in the encounter against the bad guys. Terrain and pathing, difficult terrain, using impassable terrain. We talked about our HOTS. Those are hazards, obstacles, tricks, and traps. Things that you can put down that kind of change how the player characters can't always run in a straight line at whatever they're trying to attack. Also, we'll get into things like cover and line of sight. The half cover, three-quarter, full cover, what that means for things, line of sight and effect. We talked about it a little bit. Line of effect's not as much of a thing in 5e and 24. There's only very specific circumstances, like Wall of Force, that change line of sight and effect. So where you can see something but you can't interact with it, which Wall of Force usually does, depending on what you're trying to do. And then line of sight and effect can also be different. I think the example we used was the crawling through a dungeon and taking out your little steel mirror and looking around the corner and being like, oh, well, if the wizard looks around the corner with their steel mirror and they're able to see like a bugbear headed that way, it was like, that's line of sight. That means they can shoot something like magic missile that will actually like go around the corner and attack that guy before they even know what's happening. Elevation and traversal, changing up the elevation. Talk about climbable, jumpable. One of the things we didn't talk about here, and I'm going to just add it in here. We'll do that Let's what's it gonna be? Trying to think of how to phrase it really succinctly. Not doing a very good job. I know that sounds very. We'll just write it up. So ladders, ropes, stairs, ramps, elevators. Changing traversal. That's what I should put. Traversal. I'm just gonna put traversal. That's one thing I didn't touch on a lot last time, but traversal is one of the things that comes up and be like, okay, how do you get from one area to another? It's not always just you have to climb the cliff face. It's like, is there a ladder? They can kick the ladder out of the way. You know, is there a rope? Is there some sort of like winch elevator situation with a counterweight that you can mess around with? Are there stairs? Is there a ramp? If there's a ramp, do they roll things down the ramp at you if you try to run up the ramp? Stuff like that. Or you can roll things down at the monsters. I've played in adventures and run adventures in which there's like a ramp that you have to run up, and the ramp's like super slick. It's either wet or something, has grease on it or something, so it's actually very difficult. You have to make checks to run up it, and if you fail a check, you slide down the ramp a bit or all the way to the bottom. Then you have to get up and try again, and then you throw some archers at the top, and you're like, you're gonna have to run up there if you want to get them, or you're gonna have to climb up the cliff, which is the other way to do it, which is faster, but also requires probably a higher check to do, as opposed to running up the ramp, which is generally easy. But I do like it when there's a failure and they just slide down the ramp, because it is funny to think about for your player characters, for your players to be like, as they slide back down and have to get up and run it. We talked about light and obscurement, bright light, dim light, darkness, magical darkness, your vision, obscurement, and light versus heavy, one which basically gives you the blind condition, when light obscurement really only gives you disadvantage on perception checks, which is not great, but it is a good. So light obscurement is really only useful for like planning ambushes mechanically. Usually I give them kind of cover. I usually give them like half cover or something if they're in the obscurement, just because light obscurement just isn't very potent. It sucks that there's not like a tactical advantage to being in there other than you can hide. But if we're talking about it's difficult to see into there, then that's why you have disadvantage on perception checks. Then it makes sense if you try to attack somebody in like a mist, that they would be harder to hit. Especially when heavy goes all the way to being like, oh, you're just blinded, and you automatically have disadvantage. So instead, using maybe something that's like the cover rules that gives you like, oh, well, if you're in the mist, people who are attacking into the mist, you have a +2 to AC or something like that. Or maybe you just have to make a perception check before you even succeed on the perception check before you can even like specifically target somebody. So yeah, that was all last time. We got through it. It took longer than it should. Always does. Shouldn't be surprised with that. Hunt you down with a Chihuahua wolf pack. Sorry, missed that. yeah. Tiny goblins, tiny wolves. Just a full wolf pack of ankle biters. All right, so today we're going to talk about some non-HP combat dangers. So, one of the things that D&D's usually pretty good about, not always, but usually pretty good, really depending on which edition you're in. And 5e in 2024 is definitely on that side where when it comes to doing things in the game, their advice to dungeon masters is kind of like, just kind of make it up. And also it's like your game to kind of change and alter and kind of screw with, because we're going to leave a lot of things kind of loosey-goosey to begin with. I'm not going to, unlike something like maybe a 3rd or 4th edition that has really concrete rules for a lot of situations, 5e is more like a 1st or 2nd edition or even original D&D, where they're just kind of like, hey, you do whatever you want. That's kind of their advice to DMs. we're not going to make rules. It's the rulings versus rules kind of debate. And we're like, oh, we're going to empower you to make a bunch of rulings. So, that basically kind of gives you license. Let's say hit the mic. That gives you license as a dungeon master or game master, and you can do this for any game, any edition of any game. You don't have to, and you don't actually need permission. You can just do it. It's your game. You bought it, right? So you can do whatever you want with it. The idea being that you can just kind of mod parts of the game, like the homebrew style. So one of the things that's really, really useful to keep combat interesting and exciting, and to really keep things mixed up and fresh and always dangerous, is to stop messing as much with hit points. Hit points are good, and that's sort of like your baseline. This is how we attack player characters. That's how they deal with monsters. Everything's hit point damage. But everything doesn't need to be hit point damage. And we'll talk about some of the things that they do that D&D, as a game, as it's published, does pretty well. Things it doesn't really touch very often. So the first of those is conditions. So in addition to just doing hit point damage, do conditions. Now, monsters are really good at this, as they're published in D&D 5e in 2024. Lots of monsters have some sort of condition they do, from the very, very often basic poison condition to things that do stunned, or things that petrify you, except things like that. So doing conditions. And basically what we want to do is we want to usually you want to do so this is if those of you who are familiar with the editions of D&D are probably familiar with this language, the save versus suck versus save versus death. So very, very old school D&D. There are a lot of save versus death effects. It's like, hey, if you fail the saving throw, your guy's he dead. There's nothing about it. He just dies. So as the editions kind of go through their iterations, we see this move away from save versus death and instead save versus suck. Be like, oh, you got hit with this effect. You're not dying, but you are in a really crappy place. This is things where you start to see things like ability damage, even though you can definitely kill somebody with ability damage, but it's usually it will always take more than one failed save for that to happen. Usually takes about 3, maybe 4, depending on the character. Shadows are really well-known, infamous almost, especially in 5e 2024, for doing strength damage for being a CR1 monster. They can do strength damage instead of, hit point damage. And though I think they do hit point. No, they don't do hit point damage. They only do strength damage. Which is right down here. So I'm jumping ahead of myself. We're going to go ahead and put shadows down there, because that's sort of the big one, the iconic one. You throw a bunch of shadows at your players, you can kill them real fast. I've done it. You can do it too, and kill a character, because they just don't do very well. Actually, I lied. I had a character that died doing that. No, actually, I take that back. No, I've done both. I've killed character using that, and I've died using that. It's not terrible. It's not the worst way to go, for sure, to lose a player character to something like that. It feels thematic, usually, because it's usually a very thematic monster that does something like that. But the conditions are all about doing save versus suck. So you want to blind them and do stuff. You do. I'll just put it. Actually, I'm going to change it. So you want to talk about the durations of things that you do to your player characters. Most D&D effects in 5e 2024 are save. It's like if you get hit with it on your turn, you have the ability to save against it, and each turn thereafter. And then D&D 5e 2024 does the weird thing where it's like, oh, if you saved from this effect, you're immune to it for 24 hours. I actually usually just cancel that out. I was like, usually in a fight, they're not gonna fail it more than once. But it also sucks to have some creature that's got like a fear effect or something and it hits somebody in the first round, or it uses their fear effect in the first round. Everybody saves against it, and then it's like, oh, this fear aura now does nothing for the rest of the fight because now they're all immune to it. for the next 24 hours. They only need to be immune to it for the next 1 minute, first off. And even then, I was like, it does suck. Like, the aura is still going. It feels like that should still happen. But those are saves. And then EOYNT is just end of your next turn. That's a shorthand for it. Lots of things will do that as well. I tend to like this one, especially when saves are at the end of a turn anyways. Usually if it's some sort of debilitating thing like you're stunned or something like that, and you save from stunned, well, saving throws happen in 5e/24 at the end of your turn. I do think it's one of the things where it'd be nice to maybe have it at the front of the turn and be like, oh, I saved out of that effect, so now I actually get to do my turn. Instead of being like, and your entire turn is you don't do anything. And that, I think that's okay, but I think that's end of your next turn kind of thing. Where it's like, oh, you get stunned until the end of your next turn, so it's just going to be, you're going to lose the one turn. And it's not, because saves are great. I enjoy saves. I like throwing them at the, my players for sure know that I love throwing saves at them. Forcing them to save against effects. Do it all the time. They love and hate it. Probably. They're constantly on edge. And that's not true. They shouldn't be constantly on edge. But, you know, you make decisions and things happen sometimes. But saves are really great. I really like them. What sucks is that even if you have a low DC, you can't account for their dice. I've had DCs that are like 11 or 12 that players just get on a cold streak and they cannot break out of it. Reminds me of a one-shot I was running, oh, gosh, maybe a year ago? Maybe not even that long ago. We'll say a year ago. A year ago, in which one of the players' characters got trapped in a mirror. And the DC to get out of the mirror is like a 12. And there's a monster in there that fights with them while they're in there. Now, for those unfamiliar with the tables from, stories from my table, you won't know, but my players and their characters don't like to stick together. They like to get dropped into a place and then immediately scatter to the corner like cockroaches. They all go in different directions. I don't mind it, but it does make things kind of slow at the table, not gonna lie. It also makes things really dangerous. So we have one player character that got trapped in a mirror, and then none of the other player characters are anywhere near them. And so they spent a bunch of rounds stuck in a mirror, trying to get away from this monster that was very powerful, was meant to be encountered by like the entire group. So they're running away from this thing, and they just could not make the save to get out of the mirror. So that is the problem with saves, is that even if it's like a DC 12, cold dice are cold dice, and you can't account for that. Like, they're just going to do it. So that's one of the things where you might use something like an end of your next turn. Or you roll a d4 and be like, in 1d4 rounds, or 1d4 minus 1, 1d3 rounds, I guess. 1d3 rounds, you're going to be stunned, you'll be petrified, you'll be paralyzed, you'll be grappled, whatever it is. But having a nice end of your next turn, or for 1d3. But both of these are really concrete. So you know there's going to be an end to it. Whereas saves, you will assume when you're planning things that they will be concrete. But that is very, very, very mushy cement. That is not concrete yet. They can fail a bunch of saves, or they can make a bunch of saves up front, and then you just won't get to use that. If you're following that, immune to the effect for 24 hours. So conditions, great, love them, use them. Conditions are things that I'm not sure a lot of Dungeon Masters or Game Masters use a ton outside of monsters that do those conditions. It's like you can do all sorts of stuff with that. You can do all sorts of exploration stuff with it. Let me grab it. Just kidding, I moved it. I was gonna look at my DM binder that has all the conditions written down in it. That's fine. Because I was gonna be like, oh, you can always have like a charmed trap if you have a dungeon room that plays like almost like Seder kind of music. There's a chance to be like, oh, creatures that are in this room there's a chance they'll get charmed. And so if you have you can have a fun encounter where you have monsters that are already in that room who are charmed, and then you have player characters that come into that room, and then some of them get charmed, and none of them are. Maybe it's almost like a false calm emotions, like it just makes everybody friendly in the room. And so these monsters and the PCs can't fight each other when they're in the room, but they're aware of each other. And then you have the one archer in the back, or the wizard in the back, who doesn't walk into the room and is like, oh yeah, no, I shoot fireball at those guys who are in the room. But it's fun to have like effects and stuff like that, and that changes that battlefield and adds things in that are different. So that's a fun way to use additions. Curses and diseases, which function very similarly in 5e 2024. They're great. They're hard to get rid of for lower level characters. Because your cleric in the party does not have access to either restoration spell or remove curse, which I think is at the same level as greater restoration, or very close. Remove curse. It's very similar. So they're great, but they are hard to get rid of. But you know what they are? They're potent quest hooks. Let's see. Tomb of Annihilation literally has that is the thing for Tomb of Annihilation. Guess what? People's souls are all screwed up because the Lich is stealing them. And that affects the player characters directly and their patron. Be like, go deal with the Lich. Who's doing that? We know where he is vaguely. We know he has a temple in the middle of the jungle. Go find it and deal with that. So he's not gobbling up our souls. And again, your lower level character is there, so you don't have access to something like remove curse, which would deal with that. It's like, yeah, I could, or I could just cure myself. Diseases are really great too. Just gave one of my player characters Cackle Fever because they bought some discount potions, and one of the fast ways to get Cackle Fever is to use basically dangerous potions or not well mixed potions or expired potions. They're well past their sell by date. And so they did that, failed their con save, and so they got the Cackle Fever, which is real bad, by the way, in 5e 2024. Quite bad. It's not a good disease. But I had a way to get rid of them because I didn't want them to have Cackle Fever for the festival. And I knew this character they were gonna meet this NPC anyways, and so I rolled to see if the NPC was a powerful enough spellcaster to do that. Excuse me. And they are. So they showed up and they gave him a little heal. And they made sure that it wasn't one of those spells that cost actually a lot of money, strangely. Identify does, which is a first level spell, which costs 100 gold, which makes it kind of out of range for most first level parties, especially early on, to be able to identify things. But for some reason, like restoration spells don't have a material cost component, which seems like a weird oversight. So yeah. What was I gonna say? I'll put it rare. So it's just keep that in mind. It's they're both hard to get rid of, just to save out of them because they usually take multiple days, at the very least for diseases. And sometimes even takes days before they show up in game. You can be like, oh, this basically lies dormant in your system for 2 days, and then suddenly you're sick and you don't know why. And you've been infectious this entire time. The spells. And do that instead. So yeah, they're hard to get rid of. Potent quest hooks. Rare restoration and remove curse spells. So if you get it, it's hard to get rid of. Even if you get it naturally, you try and get rid of it through saving, which is not how curses work, but does tend to be how diseases work. So it's something to play with, but remember when you open that particular can of worms, and you really don't, is that it will take a while in your campaign potentially to get rid of it. So basically, if somebody gets hit with a curse or a disease, if you're doing a one-shot or an adventure or something like that, they're basically going to have that curse or disease the entire adventure. So it's something to keep in mind when you're planning out other encounters and other things that are in the adventure, and be like, remember that probably some of the people are going to have this. So don't go too hard, especially if it's one of the curses or diseases that does real bad stuff to you, like gives you disadvantage on attack rolls or something like that, or lowers your AC or lowers your like hit point maximum. A lot of diseases do that. As does exhaustion, which is our next point. Exhaustion is probably my favorite mechanic. And this is the 2014 exhaustion. I do not like the 2024 exhaustion. Talk about the differences real quick. And the new exhaustion is basically like you just start taking floating modifier negatives to stuff. So it starts at -1, then -2, -3, -4, -5. Which those floating modifiers are in direct opposition of how 5e was designed. So it's sort of like a design work. They don't work together. Because nothing else in 5e 2024 kind of does that with floating modifiers. And that was definitely a design they were trying to not do. And that's why everything's like advantage, disadvantage kind of things. And even it's extremely rare to even find things like the cover system where instead of getting disadvantage or something like that, you have a hard, you get a +2, you get a +5 to AC in dexterity saving throws, where you have hard floating modifiers to get added. And they're not variable, they're always going to be 2 and 5. And then you have the new ones that don't do that. So I still use the 2014 rules in my current campaign, and I probably always will as long as I'm playing 5e 2024, just because they actually do something. So you get disadvantage on ability checks. That's their first level of exhaustion. Second level of exhaustion is half speed, I believe. Third level of exhaustion, that's the big one. That's when you start getting disadvantage on saving throws and attack rolls. So the first 2 levels of exhaustion are not terrible. So you can do stuff, but they'll feel it as they're playing the game. Because suddenly characters become not as useful outside of combat, where they're doing things like a bunch of ability and skill check rolls. They'll be like, I'm really not doing very well at this because I don't feel well because I'm tired. Then you get to that second level and slowed. If you're doing like a dungeon crawl, it's not too bad. But as soon as you get out and being like, we've got to like walk over land, if it happens to you in the wilderness and you get your second level of exhaustion, and be like, that just halves your pace. So it takes twice as long to get places. So that's time and resources, which means more rations, etc. If you use rations in your game and other sort of ammunition, other things that you play the resource management part of D&D, which, my personal opinion, you should. It's a very important part of the game. And it really helps to do things like rein in ranged characters a lot, who can be extremely powerful and hard to deal with if you don't. By being like, you have a limited supply of ammunition that allows you to do the thing where you do a whole bunch of damage and don't have to get near a monster to swipe at you. So changing that up and then making things like just getting from point A to point B can be kind of difficult. You can use supplies. You get exhausted, you go slower, you have to use supplies. Then you have to stop, you have to do the foraging. Engage with that aspect of the game that oftentimes people like to just kind of gloss over and just move on to, and then complain that it's a combat heavy game. Be like, well, if all you're doing is combat, it's going to be a pretty combat heavy game. So instead of being like, use that exploration pillar and do stuff, and not your fault. Again, the DMGs don't do a great job of kind of telling you how to do that very well. Really giving you solid advice for that. So, but yeah, exhaustion is one of my favorite mechanics. Comes up all the time. I use it all the time. It also gives my players to be like, if you throw them in a dungeon like we're using our Goblin Cavern system, if you throw them in there and be like, oh, you get tired, and the further you go on, the more likely you are to get more exhaustion, but also you're in a place in a dungeon where it's not safe to take a rest to get rid of that exhaustion, and now you have an important choice to be like, do we leave? Do we try to hole up somewhere and hope that we make it through the night? Do we keep pushing forward because we think we're close to the end of the dungeon and we'd rather just push through and take down the boss and be done with the dungeon, versus trying to hole up somewhere and trying to sleep and then having to do extra combats maybe we're not prepared to do. Gear and light. Yeah. We'll start off with the other one, with the ladder. And we'll attack light sources. Use light in your games. Light's an important part of the game. It's just sort of like the resource management thing. If you're not using light in your game, you should use light in your game. It's one of the things that really makes combat more difficult, being like, because if you can't see, you have the blinded condition, which means you have disadvantage on all your attack rolls, and people who can see you have advantage on all their attack rolls. That will immediately make combats way more difficult against your player characters if you put them in a position where they cannot see. So attacking light sources is something that monsters that see really well in the dark would do. So now we do have the issue in 5e 2024 that most races have dark vision, which is technically low light vision. So, and most monsters have that. So getting rid of a torch usually can be harmful to both sides of the combat if there's no other light source at all. But you also have monsters that have things like blind sense, tremor sense, or blind sight, tremor sense. They have those abilities to see, and in those cases, they should absolutely try to get rid of the light, especially if they are thoughtful monsters. I'm thinking of like Grimlocks. Grimlocks are a good one that you can run into in caves because they have blind sight. I believe they have blind sight. So they're humanoid-ish intelligence. So they should be like, oh well, I'll attack the light source and get rid of that. And you can flavor that because for those who are not familiar with Grimlocks, they ain't got eyes. That's kind of the whole thing. They're kind of like people in caves who kind of evolved to not have eyes because they don't need them because they're in the dark all the time. But then they're going to be real scared of things like fire. So if they get close to a player character and they have a torch up, and they'll be like, do their best Frankenstein impression, be like, "Arr, fire," and then try to knock it out of the person's hand. And maybe stomp on it or put it out, or just try to break a wizard's concentration on the light spell or anything like that. Find a way to put it darken it in some way. Throw a blanket over somebody or something like that. So yeah, attack light sources really good. Disarm. Disarms don't get used very often. About the only time we see disarms come up in 5e 2024 is something like heat metal. Somebody using the heat metal spell. Which is very clutch if you have a big old monster humanoid. Let's say you guys run across a giant. The giant's got a big weapon. You use heat metal on the weapon. They drop it, and suddenly, instead of swinging 4d6 of damage at you, now they're rolling 2d6 or whatever. However you yell it. Actually, I guess it'd be d4. So it'd go from like 4d6 for like a maul or something like that for a large size creature, and then that would get dumped down to like 2d4. For just swinging their fist at you. And that's much more reasonable damage to take. So there's a lot of tactical reasons why you would do that. So you want weapons, shields, spellbooks, holy symbols, etc. Instead of etc., let's put the potions. Good one. Ammunition. I haven't done that one, but that one would be awful. This hobgoblin runs up to the ranger and just grabs all the arrows out of their quiver and just throws them on the other side of the room. Okay, ranger, you're gonna have to fight me with your sword now. You don't get to use the arrows anymore. That's a fun one. Yeah, if your characters have potions on them, presumably they have them stored like on a bandolier or something that they can get quick access to instead of having to like drop their bag and look through it. There's no reason your monsters can't be like, I'm gonna take that nice red healing potion from you and use it myself. There's no reason you can't do that, especially, again, we're talking about primarily, since we're using goblins, they're very humanoid centric, so they got little grippers. They can grab stuff, and they're relatively smart, so they know how to use it. But knocking away weapons from, if you have a paladin or a great weapon fighter, somebody who uses a big great sword or maul or whatever it is, just knocking it out of their hands and then kicking it across the floor, if you can. It's a big weapon. Doing that sort of stuff. Ripping shields off of people. You have the paladin in plate armor with a shield, and you're like, man, it's really hard to hit that 20 AC. If only there was a way I could oh. Yeah, he grabs your shield and tries to wrench it off of you. Reduce your AC by 2. You can do stuff like that. Very, very fun kind of stuff. It's not just like, oh, I hit them and I do damage to them, which is what we're trying to get away from. It's trying to change things for monsters to do and ways to threaten the characters. That's not just like, I hit them and try to do damage to them with hit points. That's the whole point. So we're making them bad at doing their thing. We're trying to rip off their shields, their weapons. Wizards are a great target for spellbooks. I don't know if you know this, but most wizards, they got real dog strength scores. Usually it's one of their dump stats. It's usually either an 8 or a 10, which means they basically get no modifier to it, or they have a -1 modifier to it. So if you have your bugbear go over there, the wizard who's casting their spells, reading out of their book, and he goes over there and does like a very much high school bully and pushes him into the locker and grabs his book and just throws to the other side of the room and starts punching on him, trying to stuff him in the locker. Do classic bullying of your wizards. No, my books. No, my book. You wouldn't hit a wizard with glasses, would you? I will. And I'll try to kill you. Wizards are always a good target. Yeah, wizards. I mean, clerics too. Lots of even dexterous characters. So if you play one of these, a very, very popular things are like dex fighters. You have somebody who's a dex fighter. Well, if you have somebody who's going to force you to use strength by you're having to basically tug a war with a bugbear for your sword, the bugbear's probably going to win, and then he's going to have your sword, which he can also just use. So he'll take your sword and try to stab you with your own rapier. So taking those spell components, like taking the spell component pouch, holy symbols, whatever arcane focus your wizard is using, or your sorcerer, or whoever it is. If they're out there doing their best Harry Potter impression with the wand, your sorcerer's out there, Levioso and all that good stuff. And then the bugbear's just like snaps their wand. Okay, cool, you don't have an arcane focus now. That's going to be a problem for you. And like I said, taking the potions and ammunition. So anything, attack the gear. One of the things that I'd like to see more often in D&D and other actually any TTRPG, is dealing with the fact that, hey, you're wearing like a 50-pound backpack, right? Like at all times? I don't know if you've done a lot of backpacking in your life, or really worn like a heavy backpack that's filled with like books or something like that. If you have, then you'll know, mobility's impaired, let's put it that way. And it's real easy for somebody to grab you by the backpack and just kind of move you around. Makes it actually really difficult to fight. And so that is something that I wish was used more in TTRPGs, to be like, oh, if you really want to fight effectively, you need to drop your pack. Which is not something we usually see. I think they showcase it a little bit in things like Lord of the Rings, just because those are literally people wearing backpacks. And so you see them kind of struggle sometimes, especially the hobbits, in like fights, because the backpacks are big on them. And it just like turning around and doing stuff is really difficult. Compared to seeing the scenes in which they're not. And I don't think that was necessarily the intent, but it is just the practicalness of having somebody wearing something on some sort of load on their back, trying to move around and attack things. trying to, and then having monsters who are going to push you around or make you disadvantaged because of it. Or, like I said, if we use our alternative sort of goals or motivations, if they want your stuff, instead of fighting you, they pick up your backpack and try to run away with all of your stuff. Very, very different encounter then. Now it becomes a chase encounter where you're trying to chase down your stuff rather than a combat encounter. Never, it's holding my stuff. Yeah, don't take my backpack, it's got my stuff in it. Exactly. Which is exactly why we want to take the backpack, because it's got their stuff in it. Especially if they can get their hands on a bag of holding. If your party has a bag of holding and they just try to grab your bag of holding and run off with it, because it probably has all your money in it too. So, rich targets for attacking. So yeah, we're going to do this stuff like that. We'll put it on here. We'll do that. Taking or, we'll say sundering. Backpacks and other gear. So taking your sundering backpack, so you could try to steal the backpack off of them. They could also just like take their axe or something and just like chop through your backpack, and maybe if you're fighting on like a cliffside trail or something like that, there's an opportunity that some of your gear might spill over the edge and fall off the cliff, and then you won't have your gear anymore, have some of that gear. So all stuff like that. In the one shot that we played last night that I ran, there was an encounter that, and I didn't make this encounter, it's in the book. It was a pre-made encounter, a pre-made adventure that I was running for a one shot. It does have a thing that's to be like, and then your gear can fuse to the floor if you fail to save. I was like, oh, that's weird. Not sure how that's gonna go. Now, it would be really bad if they had lost something like a magic sword, like a +2 magic sword to that, +2 longsword or something like that. But no, it's just standard gear, and it's cool because in ICRPG, right here, which is what I ran last night, there is a weapon tag, like the weapon property, that's called durable, which means that in an opportunity in which a normal piece of gear would be destroyed, there's a chance that it won't be destroyed, which is a super cool trait for a weapon to have. You're like, oh, this weapon's actually, it's more difficult to destroy, and that tag tells the game master, be like, oh, you can just destroy gear. Like, that's a thing we expect you to do in the game. Well, when the level progression in ICRPG is all about loot, that's how there's not levels, you just get stronger by getting more stuff and better stuff. So attacking stuff is basically attacking their ability to fight. Much like what we're talking about here, you attack their gear, and that in ICRPG, if you're attacking their gear, things are way worse for the player characters, because then they might lose, their strength or something like that. Which is just like doing stat damage. There's stat damage down here. Yeah, so attacking gear, attacking hit dice. This is a fun one. So yeah, using powers or things that this is a cool thing if you want to make your magic feel very weird and very potent in the world, is have your magic, like magical traps and spells and things like do that, have monsters that have spells, because again, we've been given the license, we can just make stuff up, we don't actually have to follow the rules. That's the thing about being the game master, as you play by Judge Dredd rules. I am the law. So you get to make up the law. The mechanics get to be whatever you want them to be, especially for your monsters. So your monster can absolutely have an ability that instead of they shoot a magic beam that just does hit point damage, like a firebolt or something like that, you can be like, oh, well, this monster's spell, this bad guy spell, this Hobgoblin Devastator, that's our caster that we were using for the example. He has a spell, he casts it, if you fail to save, he steals your hit die. So if you're a level 4 character, you only got 4 of those suckers. And they are your primary way to heal outside of sleeping. And even when you sleep, you don't get them all back. So having a monster that steals hit dice can really, really hamper the party, because what they're basically doing is they're being the ghost of hit points future, essentially, because they're stealing future hit points from you rather than your current hit points, which is a very fun thing to do to place in an adventure, because you can place that encounter very, very early on in an adventure, which the player characters don't get hurt a lot because it doesn't do a lot of hit point damage to them. But as they get further and further into the adventure itself and deeper into the encounters, they won't be able to heal themselves readily. And now they'll remember that first encounter and be like, oh, that guy took all our hit dice and we can't take a short rest and heal now. Crap. What do we do? And that's how you use that. So it's really nice to throw very early on in an adventure, and then suddenly the players have to deal with the circumstances and the consequences of that combat 2 hours later in the session. And they're like, we can't heal because we don't have hit dice because that character took them from us. That's a good way to do this. This is one of the classic ways I like to do this, is use this for like hag magic. Because I want their magic to feel weird and different, rather than just the outlined spells that are written and published in the books. Is using something that would be like, oh, well, you make a deal with a hag and the hag steals your hit dice. They siphon your life off of you in that way. You make deals with a demon, the demon takes your hit dice instead. Or you make a bargain with them and they permanently change your hit dice. Like, oh, you permanently have one less hit die, as almost like a curse. For making this deal until you do the thing you're supposed to do as part of your deal. It's the collateral for the deal. So yeah, that's hit dice. Like, if you want to be extra mean, you do this last part and be like, oh, you have that Hobgoblin Devastator, and he reaches out a gnarled finger and points at the player character, and you can feel this life being sort of like sucked out of you. And you see it bolster him, and you roll their hit die and be like, and he gets a D8. I rolled a 6. He has a +2 con. He gets 8 hit points back. They're like, no, you took my hit points and you used them for you. You can't do that. That's not fair. It shouldn't be fair. It should never be fair. It's supposed to be mean. But obviously, you don't want every monster to do these things. But these are the things that kind of like make combat both more difficult and make it more interesting. Make it more difficult in an interesting way. Is really what we're trying to do here. So yeah, screw with hit dice. Because remember, on the when you take a long rest in 5e/24, you get half your hit die maximum back. So level 4 characters will get 2 back. So if you get them to a place where they can't get their full hit dice back in a rest, especially if it's a longer adventure or a longer campaign, this will be these lingering effects of being in combat. And this works really well if you have, if you want to distempo a bunch of murder hobos who are like, we show up and we attack everything and we kill everything and we don't talk to anybody. If you do these sort of lingering effects and be like, every time that you guys get into combat, there's some sort of lingering effect that lingers on, that just sticks around, that makes you guys worse and worse. The more combats you go, you heal your hit point damage, but you're worse and worse at, you get curses, you get diseases, you get your hit dice taken from you, your gear gets stolen, and now you're going to have to like engage with people, you get exhaustion. All these sorts of things will be like, oh, man, combat's bad. Maybe that shouldn't be our go-to answer for every single situation. Maybe, I don't know, should we just try to like talk to the goblins just once? Maybe. Now, obviously, if you have a group that always plays like that, you are not going to use the stick in the carrot versus stick method. You can't discipline them into being better players. You just need to show them the path, but you can't force them down that path. They're going to want to be murder hobos if they're a murder hobo party. And you show them the alternatives again and again and again, but you can't force them not to fight. D&D is a combat game. They're going to want to fight stuff. Most of the abilities and most of the rules are around fighting. So you're going to do a bunch of fighting. You're not going to get away from that. And if you want to get away from that, if you want to do play a game that doesn't focus on that thing, where combat's not a big component of it, probably look at a different system. There are lots of other TTRPG systems. If you want one that doesn't focus as much on combat, there are systems that do that. And that might be more up your alley, because that will close off some options for a group. Now, they might not like the game, is the thing. But, most parties will at least let you run a one-shot if it's not too complicated of a system to pick up. Also, if you're the DM, you kind of get to choose whatever you want to run. So, if you decide that you want to run Monster Hearts and nobody wants to play Monster Hearts, you can be like, all right, well, somebody else has got to run stuff because I want to run Monster Hearts. And if we're not going to play that, then somebody else has to run. And I'm going to play for a bit. That is, I think, a perfectly reasonable way to talk to your party of people you generally probably run for all the time. If nobody wants to play your game, you don't take your ball and go home, but you say, all right, well, we're going to play with somebody else's ball. I think that analogy works. Close enough. You know what I'm talking about. All right, spell slots and ability charges. Yeah. So these are limited resources. We'll just say hit limited resources. Again, while this is not today, this day and age, or however you want to refer to it, contemporary D&D is usually what I say. In contemporary D&D, we don't focus as much on the resource management aspect of D&D. That's generally not the, I guess, culture around it right now. Most of it is more like, oh, people look at it as, oh, it's a collaborative storytelling tool. And it's like, it's also a game. It is legitimately just a game. And part of that is resource management game. It is in the same style of like a worker placement board game or something like that. It's about managing resources you have and getting the most out of those resources. And that's not necessarily a super popular opinion nowadays, but all that stuff's still in the game. That's why I'm like, it's very important, I think, to track things like ration and ammunition the same way that we track things like spell slots and hit points. It's like, they're all limited resources. Why are we tracking some of the limited resources but not other limited resources? Instead of using the full suite. So doing things like attacking spell slots and ability charges was great. So lots of classes have the abilities. So obviously spellcaster is very easy to get. We'll get that out of the way. Very easy. Be like, oh, this guy, in the same way that we can steal hit dice from people, we can steal spell slots from them. Be like, and I think there is actually a published monster that does this. I don't remember which monster it is. But it is something that it's really good to use against casters if you have really powerful casters. Especially once you start getting up into higher levels of D&D where things become really difficult sometimes to challenge parties. More difficult to challenge parties. They've got a ton of hit points. They have a ton of spells, especially spellcasters. Your wizards and your clerics, they get access to a lot of spells. More spells than they'll usually use in an adventuring day. So a good way to do that is to just start eating their spells. If you start eating their spell slots, and you can have a monster that has it as like their sort of like standard attack, their basic attack, and be like, oh, they steal your lowest level spell slot. And at first they'll seem fine, like a higher level than 4th. So if we were talking about like a 7th level or 12th level wizard or something like that, they're like, oh yeah, sure, you can have one of my 6 first level spells that I'm not using for anything except mage armor. Yeah, sure. Oh no, he hurt me. Like, well, once all the first levels are gone, or if they've used their mage armor, they've done an identify spell, they've done some other things, those first level utility kind of spells that are pretty common. Your cleric's throwing out blesses and things like that is really useful low level concentration spell. Doing those sorts of things. Suddenly you start eating 2nd level spell slots. You go, I don't like losing a 2nd level spell. There's a lot of super useful 2nd level spells. I need those spell slots so I don't have to upcast. This monster's a problem. I need to take care of this monster. So if you imagine if you're building an adventure and you're putting encounters in your adventure, if you did the hit die encounter at the very beginning, where you kind of pinched at their hit dice, and then you show up with the spell slot healing encounter about 2/3 of the way through. Then you don't usually want it to be like the big bad, because you want to steal the spell slots before they get to the big bad. That's using your noodle. That'll make your big bad more difficult to fight. But if you put them in 2/3, that means that your wizard and your cleric have probably used a lot of their low-level spells at that point. They might not have any first-level slots left, or maybe they only have one. Maybe they're holding one back for like just a random cure wounds or something like that. You know, just in case kind of spell. And you're like, oh, well, you're going to lose that slot. And they're going to be like, oh, man, I only got one level 2 slot left. And that utility spell I was going to cast for first level, now I'll have to cast at second level, which means I can't use one of the more useful second level spells, because I need to keep that in reserve. Ooh. Suddenly combat becomes more thinky. They got to think about it a little bit more tactical. Not necessarily in moving around the grid, but tactical as in how do I use my resources? And so if you put those two things together, and then you have your boss fight at the end of that, whew, you've got the ingredients for a real good encounter and adventure. A bunch of cool encounters which things are not standard. So you're gonna have your big boss monster, that's standard, that's whatever. But you have one where we're stealing hit dice. You have another one where we're stealing spell slots and ability charges. And ability charges, by that we mean anything that's like the fighter's second wind or something like that. And be like, yeah, I take that encounter from you. I take that ability from you if you still have it. You don't get it back until it's been used, essentially. Until you take another short rest. Your fighter's not gonna be happy about it. They're gonna want to kill that monster real bad. Here's the thing: it's like with the spell slots. It's like you don't have to make it. You don't have to go against the high level stuff. You can go against the lowest rung first. So instead of that, you could be like, you want to take the lowest or let. I said let. I'm not letting you do it. I'm making you do it. You make the player choose. So you rock up. You've got that 4th level wizard or whatever. Like 12th level wizard who has that level 1 slot that they're hanging on to because they have a very specific spell they want to do something with. We don't know why. We don't know that. Whatever reason, they want to hold on to that spell slot. Then you rock up and be like, okay, this guy hits you with this effect. You have to use a spell slot. Doesn't matter which one. You mark off whatever level of spell slot you want. But you lose one. And then they're like, I really need that first level slot. Now, 5e 2024 is not a good example of that because one of the strengths of the spellcasting in 5e 2024 is that you can upcast basically everything. So not really a concern. But in other editions of the game, sometimes you want that first level slot. Though I think pretty much I take that back. I don't think there is an edition of D&D that doesn't allow you to burn at least a higher level slot to, even without upcasting, to use a lower level spell. So I take that back. But you can still let them choose. Now, you can also do things. So in spell, one of the things I didn't add in here is you can steal their instead of memorization, I'll do prep. And this is something that's used in things like Powered by the Apocalypse, so Dungeon World kind of stuff. If you aren't successful at casting a spell, you can lose the ability to cast the spell until you take another rest and have to basically re-prep the spell. But you can, because they don't use spell slots, so it's like every time that you're successful with it, you can keep casting it. But once you fail at it, there's a chance that you could lose access to the spell until you basically sleep. So, in addition to your slots, those ability charges, you can also just go against their spell prep. And be like, okay, this creature reaches into your mind and pulls out a mote of your memory, you lose the ability, or changes your access to things if you're a divine caster or whatever it is. You flavor it however you want. Reaches out and turns something off it basically in your mind and locks you out. You're no longer able to access one of your spells until you take a long rest or a short rest, at least to re-prepare if you're a wizard. So you pick a spell. I'm not going to tell you which one. Mark it off. You don't have that memorized anymore until you take another rest and re-prep it. This will be a fun thing to throw at it, and you do the same thing with abilities too. Be like, you're gonna lose one charge, you choose whatever it is, but you lost access to something today, so you tell me what it is. And make sure that when you do stuff like this, that they tell the whole table, so they're not just doing it by themselves. Be like, okay, what are you gonna lose? Prompt them, and so they say it out loud for the whole table, so everybody's like, oh no, you lost access to light, the light spell. Most people are gonna be like, but then, whatever. But somebody's gonna be like, crap, now one of us has to hold a torch. So who's gonna hold the torch? And that changes how you play the game. So you take the lowest, or make the player choose. That's good advice, rather than just make it super harsh. Now, you can always change that. You can always decide to be like, I'm gonna make it super harsh, but my approach to sort of combat in general for D&D is death by 1,000 cuts. Is that each individual encounter is not as important as the entire tableau of encounters in the adventure, and how they deal with that. And that's just how player characters are set up next to monsters. Monsters don't have things that recharge on short rest or long rest. We don't have those mechanics because monsters are they're expected to only be in the one scene that they show up in. Usually because they're expected to be killed, just absolutely janked by player characters. And so they don't deal with stuff like, oh, when do they get spell slots back on a short rest? Do they have spell slots? I mean, they do technically, even though they'll never get through the spell slots they're usually given in a fight. So those are things to consider as well. But the player characters do have that. So monsters show up for a moment. Player characters are in every single moment of the adventure. So if you cut a little here, 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 by the time they get towards the end of the adventure, things just become more and more difficult because they've used more resources, they've taken more damage. You put them in situations where it's like, oh, this goblins jumped out and they ambushed you. There was half a dozen of them. You guys are pretty high. You guys are 4th level. They didn't do a ton of damage to you, so each of you took 6-7 hit points of damage. And then you have to be like, is this worth resting for? Yes or no? Do we want to take the time to rest? Do we want to use hit dice for this? Do we want to use a healing spell for this? You put them in situations where they might actually say no to some of that stuff. They might go, no, we're only hurt a little bit. We're 4th level characters. We only took 6 or 7 hit points of damage. We'll be fine into the next fight. Now they're going into the next fight with basically 3/4 strength already on hit points. You hit them again. Now they have to take a short rest and they use hit dice. Now, even if they want to get back just 1 hit point of damage, they're going to have to use the hit die to do that. So if you put them in situations where they're always not at maximum HP and never at full spells or abilities, whatever those limited resources are, the more encounters you throw at them, and they don't have to be long, they don't have to be hard encounters, they can be short encounters that are 2 rounds. Goblins show up, they shoot some arrows at you, they do some damage to you, they throw a fire flask at you, and then they scurry off into the darkness. Doing that again and again and again really starts to... It's like taking body blows in boxing. It's like they're just going to wear you down. Slowly they're going to get you. It's like no individual goblin is going to be the guy that kills you, but all the goblins together, if you guys aren't careful, they can kill all of you. It's very, in its own way, it's very drawn out rendition of the famous Tucker's Kobolds. For those of you not familiar with old Tucker's Kobolds, it's one of those sort of folksy tale of D&D, the hobby. Basically, having a bunch of high-level characters just get absolutely murdered again and again and again by low-level kobolds. old school D&D, kobolds are like nothing, especially for our high level party. But Tucker, the eponymous DM, has them make all sorts of guerrilla style combat. So they have all sorts of traps set up. They shoot from behind cover. They use invisibility. They climb in the walls. They're in the goddamn walls, and overwhelm them with numbers. All sorts of things just to make it just a miserable for even high level parties, and kill a bunch of high level parties with a bunch of mook monsters. And that just kind of shows you what you can do as a DM. It's like you don't have to throw, if you have a party, you don't have to throw the Tarrasque at them. Like goblins will get it done. If you really want goblins to get it done, goblins can get it done. They can take out a high level party. It's just about how you use them and what they do. And we talked about stat damage already with our shadows. There are very few monsters that do stat damage, but there's no reason we can't do that. There's no reason, we'll do things like muscle tears, and we'll do, we put it down here because I didn't put it in. I guess curses and disease are kind of up there. No, I'm just gonna change that up there. That'll be good enough for it. Well, let me finish the actual thing I'm working on. So we're gonna add to curses and disease lingering injuries. So this is something that I've been using in my current campaign, is that whenever PCs go down to 0, they get some sort of lingering injury. We basically focus up on being like, what is the injury that takes you out of the fight? And one of the things that I wanted to avoid, why I put it in the game, and very clear for the players, told them all about it. Like, I'm putting this into the campaign to stop sort of like pop up, pop down healing, which is very common, especially in 5e 2024, where you have healers who don't heal people until they go down, to maximize the healing, because you're just as good in D&D as a 1 hit point creature or a 100 hit point creature, and to be like, really kind of play up the effect of like, you really probably shouldn't be getting knocked out this many times, like that's really bad for you. Instead, adding something that's like a lingering injury. The thing that takes you out and that takes you out of the fight, and just going off the campaign I'm running right now, is character breaks their leg. That's really difficult to deal with. There's not a spell, especially when they don't have like the restoration spells yet. Really difficult to deal with, and because I'm just like, it's not hit point damage, it's just a thing, and then you're slowed. At first they couldn't walk, then they were slowed, and then they kind of heal out of it over a few days. And I know, that's not super realistic to heal your broken femur in like half a week. But hey, it's D&D, and we have access to magic, so the idea that the healing magic does something, but it doesn't do it as fast as just restoring hit points. However you want to flavor it. They also like went to the doctor and things because it's like a save thing that they get out of. But anyways, adding lingering injuries, being like getting in fights in D&D is not. There's not a lot of downsides to it. It's like you either die or you're fine. So adding something like a lingering injuries is like, no. Every time you get into combat and things don't go well, that is represented throughout the rest of the game in its own way. By nasty scars, broken bones, sundered equipment, those sorts of things. So stat damage, we did that. You can also, the shadows are the common one because they just steal strength. But you could also use it like if your hobgoblins want to come up, or your bugbear comes up and just like wrenches the rogue's arm out of place. Be like, cool, you take a 1d4 damage to your strength, or maybe they cut some sort of nerve ending or something when they attack you, and be like, oh, you take some damage to your dex. So you can use this there's a very narrative way to sort of incorporate and be like, this is what they do, and all monsters could potentially do this if they wanted to focus on doing that. And obviously for any mental ability, you can just be like, you get hit in the head, basically. You get your bell rung. And there you have it. Be like, oh, yep, you lose some intelligence. Like, you don't think so well anymore. You lose some wisdom. Maybe they, they throw something in your eye, and now you've got debris in your eye, and your eye's injured, so now you take a negative to wisdom, which is generally used for perception anyways, or insight, the ability to see and recognize when somebody's maybe got some body language that doesn't jive with their words. And then we get down to sort of miscellany, also known as, if it's part of their PC, it's fair game. We talked about that spell locking, which is what I talked about earlier. You can take away things like meta magic, reduce proficiencies. This is really good. This is why I really enjoy monsters like Nothix, which in 5e shows up in the beginning 5e starter set. Well, you haven't encountered with Nothix. And Nothix, the way they use, they're like mutated wizards essentially. But one of the things they really, really love is they love stealing bits of your mind. Usually they go for memories, but what is memory? What is a proficiency if not memory? Whether it's muscle memory or brain memory, remembering how to do something. Having a monster come in and be like, let's see, fighter and that splint mail, you've got a 19 AC, you're kind of hard to hit. Or scale mail, you're kind of hard to hit. I don't like that as much. This guy reaches into your mind and steals your proficiency for heavy armor. And you go, what? Yeah, you are no longer proficient with heavy armor. And so now you're going to take all the negatives associated with heavy armor until you get your memory back. Maybe you kill the monster. Maybe that's something you just have to relearn. That's one of the things where it's like, I'm not really probably going to come up with a solution for it. I'm going to see if you come up with a solution for it. If they're like, the wizard's like, oh, can I use something to like hold it down and like pull the memory back out of it? And I'll be like, yeah, you can do some wizard bullshit about it. Sure, why not? Or do some weird cleric heal stuff. Yeah, sure, go for it. Or a restoration thing. I think it'd be very cool. But stealing meta magics, proficiencies, the spell locking, stealing the ability to do abilities, forgetting how to use abilities in general. Yeah, it's all up for grabs. Like I said, if it's on the character sheet, it's fair game, as far as I'm concerned. Now, because we're talking about this specifically, it makes it sound like I just don't attack hit points. And no, most monsters most of the time attack hit points. Sometimes we have monsters and traps and things like that, hazards, that don't attack hit points. They attack hit points and something else. They do a little bit of both. The best of both worlds. They get that chocolate vanilla swirl. So you get a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, and everybody's happy. Except for your player character and your player, who are probably not happy that you stole their ability to use heavy armor. But suddenly, right, combat seems much, much more difficult and much more weirder. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, because I keep thinking about it, is what actually happens when you're not proficient in armor. I think you have disability on checks, right? Imposes disadvantage on all strength and dexterity based ability checks, saving throws, and attack rolls. So yeah, if you have your paladin heavy plate and you're like, you don't know how to use that anymore, that's absolutely devastating. That's a one-turn devastating thing. So obviously, when you do that and you're thinking about putting that in there, and you'll be like, oh, that absolutely devastates a character. You'd be like, that's one of those encounters, maybe it's not like an at-will they do every time. We're going to put that on a recharge timer. So it gets the first one for free, but recharges on a 5 or 6, maybe. Throw that in. So using those recharge abilities, which is really important too. So let me put that in here. So we'll put that durations as well. Should we put it in there and be like, yeah, we'll just put it down here. We don't want to overuse it. Especially some of these more devastating things, like taking away a sorcerer's access to meta magic. Generally not going to make a happy player if you do it a bunch. It's got to be a real light touch, but it should be devastating when you do it, right? You look for a combat that you think they're going to use a bunch of twin spells or something like that, and that's where you're like, all right, this is the guy who's going to take your magic from you, and it's going to be really difficult, and it's going to be uncomfy. It will be, yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable. And of course, we're going to make sure that they can get it back. Again, that's whether that's duration. It's like, oh, like we said with the spells, you're like, oh, they steal your spell prep, and until you take a long rest, you're not going to get the ability back again. Same thing with if you're basically what we're doing is forcing the fighter to use action surge. Be like, oh, they use your action surge, you don't get it. You get it back on short rest, so you'll have to take a short rest before you can use it. You want to make sure that there's a tangible way for them to get that back, whether that's a timed duration thing, or you know, be clever. Sometimes it's just like, hey, you pitch me how you get it back. And if you do a good pitch, I say, yep, that's how it works. If you don't do a good pitch, no, here's what I think happens instead. I like your idea, and this is how I'm going to try to enact your idea. If you're like, oh, well, I obviously get my meta magic back on a short rest because I think about my meta magic, and I go, that doesn't, no, you didn't pitch me well enough. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be like, it takes your long rest, and as you rest, you know, those the energies that are inherent within you as a sorcerer rebuild or are pulled in from the ether, and your cup is filled back up and filleth over again. It runneth over, and you are able to get that back. But I think that's more appropriate because you're resting on a long rest and not you sat and thought about it for an hour. Especially as maybe a wizard, I let them get away with it and be like, oh, I sit down with my book and I reprep my spell. Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely how that works. So just trying to give them away. You know, don't overuse it. Make sure they have a way to get it back. Clever play. We'll say clever play is encouraged. Me personally as a DM, and I think this is a good philosophy for most dungeon masters or game masters for any game, any system of any experience, encourage clever play. Encourage your players to be like, come up with some bullshit. Like, make it good bullshit and pitch. That's just one of the things that I learned and I think is really useful as a dungeon master is to be like, I don't have to have the answer. You're the guy that's coming up with the answer. So you convince me that your answer works. And that's my role when I sit in my adjudicator chair. I put on my adjudicator hat as a dungeon master and be like, yeah, sure, maybe that works. Or, you didn't fully convince me, we're going to need to do a roll about it. Something like that. Is that you are the arbiter of the rules, so you get to interpret them. That's why we have the judge. And yeah, that's pretty much it for non-hit point combat dangers. That was it. I think we hit everything pretty well. So we had our conditions, adding that. We're doing curses, diseases, lingering injuries, adding that stuff in. We got exhaustion. We've got attacking their gear, attacking their light sources. Doing that stuff. Going after their hit dice rather than their hit points. So stealing their future hit points. Attacking their spell prep. The spells that they have prepared or know. Attacking their slots. The spell slots. Attacking fighters and rogues and rangers and people who have abilities that they use, which are the non-caster version of having spells, usually. Taking stuff from them by taking those charges, expending those charges on them, and forcing them to have to try to rest in dangerous places, which in my game is like, I'm going to force you in a situation which is really difficult. That way you might consider taking a rest. Also knowing that the way that I run D&D is like, we will make checks for wandering monsters because you're trying to sleep in the dungeon. And that doesn't usually go well. You're basically broke into somebody's home and you're trying to take a cat nap in there. You're trying to Goldilocks this. Well, if the bears show up, they're going to eat you. So keep that in mind. It doesn't matter if you're a cute little girl or not. They're going to eat you. The bears don't care. The bears don't care. So forcing them in a situation where they have to decide, do we push forward? Do we get out of the dungeon or go back to town or whatever it is? Huddle up and try to rest and see if anything bad happens to us, knowing that there's always a risk when you try to rest to recover from injuries, because you might actually end up in a fight in which you have to expend more resources and also don't get the rest, which is really tough, right? And that's what we're doing here. We're making things tough in and out of combat. Not in a mean way. We're not trying to be mean to our players. We're just trying to keep them engaged and try to show them, hey, when you make decisions and you make choices, we're going to present a bunch of choices at you, and you got to live with those choices. You got to make them and live with them. Those consequences of it. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm glad you appreciate it and hopefully got a whole bunch out of it. Yeah, no, this is all great stuff. I really kind of like take that combat to the next level. Since we're doing this, I want to do next. We got a little bit of time left in the stream. So I think what I'm going to jump into next is we're going to talk a little bit about the one-shot I ran last night for Index Card RPG. This is the second edition. There's a master edition out now, but this is the one I had, so this is the one I ran. And so I want to talk a little bit about the one-shot, how it went for these players who didn't know anything about the system, and how they got into it for a one-shot, and how they grokked it or didn't grok it. We're going to do that, but I'm going to refill up on some drinks and take a little bio break. So we're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to run back in and we're going to talk about Icy RPG. And I might bring it up and show you guys a little bit of it, the PDF on the inside, just because the art's really cool. And I'll get some of that across. So, hang tight. I'll be back in just a minute. Okay, we are back. Or, I'm back. You better not have gone anywhere. Did you go somewhere? Did you join me in the bathroom and the coffee? Or your drink of choice? For me, for now, that's coffee. So yeah, one last thing that I did want to talk about. We'll hop back there just for a second. Last thing I did want to talk about, just because we didn't mention it in this stream, though I think I mentioned it in the first 2 streams. I know I did in the first one. Hopefully I did in the second one as well. Is when we're doing these, we've got all these things, the different ways that we can use our monsters, or ways that we can manipulate the environment, the ways that we can go after things that are not hit point damage to really kind of put the pinch on our players and their characters, is that we also don't add all these together. We don't want to add, if you go and you're like, I'm going to make the encounter to end all encounters, and I'm going to take everything here. I'm going to do everything in here. We're going to use morale. We're going to use readiness. We're going to have alternative goals. We're going to have lots of tactics and strategy. We're going to have action economy. We're going to hit the CR rating just right. And then we're going to have our encounter distance sped out that's going to be good for the monsters. We're going to have the right size and shape of battlefield. We're going to have the right terrain and pathing, the right cover and line of sight, the right elevation and traversal, the right light and obscurement to help them. And then we're going to go after all these other things that are not hit points to really put the screws to them. If you do start adding a bunch of these things together, you're going to kill your party. And it will happen sooner than you think it will. It actually does not take very much kind of pulled in together. Adding tweaking a few dials, just a few dials, just 1 or 2, will do magic. If you take all the dials and flip them all up to 11, what happens is what you expect to happen, is that you're going to kill a bunch of people. You waited here with baited mimics. Got it. You waited here with baited mimics for me. Thank goodness it was not my chair as I sat down. That mimic would have got me real good if it had been my chair. Definitely was not paying attention and just sat down. It'd be chomping on my booty. But yeah, there's the one last thing I did want to make sure that we touched on, because we hadn't touched on it thus far in the stream, is that you don't want to add a whole bunch of these things together. If you try to put everything in the stew pot, if you use all the seasonings in the stew's going to taste real bad, and nobody's going to want it. Nobody's going to want your stew. Which means that your players are not going to want you to run if you use all this stuff all the time. So it's stuff to pepper in. It's stuff you don't have to use it. You don't have to use one of these in every encounter. But I use them. It's part of my adventure design, is that I usually try to give most, not everyone, but most combats a little tweak here or there, just to make it a little interesting. Just because I think it can be a little disinteresting, or it can be encounter can become very mundane very quickly if it's just, I roll to hit you, you roll to hit me. I roll to hit you, you roll to hit me. And we keep doing that till one of us falls over. That can get very stale very quickly. So just having like 1 or 2 little things that just kind of like little pops of flavor, little pops of our herbs and spices in there. Just to tweak the formula just a little bit. Just a little bit of change goes a very long way. We put in just a little bit of, paprika. We put a little bit of that garlic in there, just a little thing, just to make it a little spicy, not a lot spicy. We don't want to dump in a bunch of ghost peppers or anything. We just want a little bit of spice. We're gonna add 1 jalapeno. That's all we're putting in there. We're just putting 1. Right, actually, peppers is actually a pretty good metaphor. So you're like, oh yeah, we want to make this dish a little spicy. We throw a serrano in there. We throw a jalapeno in there. What we don't want to do is be like, and then I put a fistful of habaneros in there. Now you can dial up the spice every once in a while and be like, okay, I'm gonna use like maybe 2 things in here. We can go up to habanero height. That's where we're gonna throw it in there, and people are gonna be like, ooh, that's spicy, but it's only those real spice freaks, those real pain freaks that are like, yeah, give me the scorpions, give me the ghost peppers, like smother it in the sauce. Those are the people when you have your hardcore power gamers that really like stuff like that and really want to be challenged and be like, all right, we're throwing all this weird stuff at you that you're going to have to deal with. Good luck. That's a spicy meatball. Spicy. Yeah. So we want it, spicy meatball is a good analogy. I like that. Yeah. We want it spicy enough that people bite into it and go, ooh, that's nice. Not that they bite into it and then be like, where's the milk? I need milk. I need milk and bread, please. And I can't eat the spaghetti. I can't eat the spaghetti. It's too spicy. Cannot eat it. Stereotype over. But yeah, so all this stuff was a lot of fun. What we do want to talk about next is ICRPG. So we'll look at my beautiful face while I pull up some stuff. I got a few notes about it. Hopefully I can read it. It's dark in front of me. But let me see if I can pull up the ICRPG book. Yeah, here we go. Just because I want to show off the adventure. We don't necessarily need to go through it step by step, but maybe we will. But what I do want to do is show off some of the art. So ICRPG, or Index Card RPG, is made by Runehammer. They're still going by Runehammer now, right? Yeah, I believe so. By Runehammer Games, technically? No, he changed his name, didn't he? No, it's still Runehammer. Also, has a YouTube channel that you can pick up. It used to be Drunken Dragons, now I think it's just called Runehammer. Here, let me go to the workspace. Alright, so here's our workspace. I gotta change our window, though. Come on. We want, we did it. Great job, guys. So this is Index Card 4, 2nd edition. Like I said, there is a newer edition out, the Master Edition. I don't have that edition, so that's not what we played. I already had Index Card Core. I've had it for a long time. Great book, by the way. Even if you never played this beautiful game, I don't know why I need to show it. You guys can see the front cover there. I don't need to be holding this. What am I doing? Anyways, even if this is a great purchase. Number one, it's not particularly expensive. You can get the PDF extremely cheaply, and even this book was not particularly expensive. And it's actually in a form factor I like. I actually like a slightly smaller book with a soft cover, just because I think it's easier to take around with me, and I don't have to worry about the spine breaking. Now, of course, it doesn't lay flat, but that's usually not a concern with me for books most of the time, because I don't run out of the books. But you should get this book. It's economical. The system's fun, by the way. Well, let's not bury the lead. The system's fun. It's a fun game. The second edition, the Master Edition is just more tweaks on the same thing. There's First Edition, Second Edition, Master Edition. I think that's it. The Master Edition is just more tweaks as they kind of really dial in the system. So go ahead and go grab that one. Do note that whatever I'm going to talk about here does change. One of the things I remembered is because when I went to get a character sheet, I accidentally got the Master Edition character sheet, and I filled out the entire character sheet until I got to doing the effort dice and went, wait, this has different effort die in it. This is not for the right edition. And so I had to go toss that and get other character sheets and fill them back out for our one shot. Because I made little pre-gens for the guys, because I didn't want to waste a whole bunch of time trying to explain how to make characters to them, especially. So I just wanted it quick, and then I could just tell them their characters. Anyways, what I was saying before I keep getting off topic is that even if you don't ever play this game, it's good just for the game mastery section. And again, go check out the YouTube channel. A lot of the stuff that's in this book is because it was first in the YouTube channel, primarily talking about D&D. So if you're playing D&D, all that stuff still works for it, but there's a game mastering section. Oh, I'm right on it. That's a cool thing. And why don't we just go to it? I keep forgetting that I brought it up. Game mastery. So it does a lot of things, a lot of cool concrete things, since we're talking about combat encounters or stuff like that. It tells you there's this oath that you want to take, that they ask you to take as a game master. I will let the torrent flow. I will remember everything. I will build a world from their actions. I will be an architect. I will be poetic. I will be energetic. I will lift them up and vanish. I will be a beacon of camaraderie. I will be a terror to behold. So it kind of gets you in the mindset of how they want you to run the game, which is a cool way to do it. I really like the oath aspect. Just like some of the other stuff we're going to talk about, there's some cool, almost theatrical elements to the system that are fun, that you don't see. I don't think I've ever seen another system, maybe. Except for maybe Mouse Guard. I think Mouse Guard's got one where you call them, when you roll ones on dice, cowards, and you're supposed to yell cowards out loud. But that sort of thing. And then it kind of goes into what we're talking about there. And then gets right into, hey, you want to know how to build adventures? Here you go. Where are the heroes? Where are they trying to get to? What is their goal? What stands between the two? Classic design. And that works for adventures and individual encounters. What are they trying to do here? Okay, I know where they are, where they're trying to get to. Now I just need to come up. The encounter design is, what's that stuff that's keeping them from doing the thing? It kind of gives you a little table down here. By the way, so one of the things is that Runehammer is a professional artist by trade, an illustrator. So you get lots of great art, and really great if you're a visual learner. This book is awesome. I'm actually not a visual learner. Not that I don't like pictures, but I don't need it written out like that or shown like that way. So it kind of gives you locations, goals, obstacles, how to plan your sessions, how to think in sessions. They think they're safe. They're never safe. There's good advice down here. Play in the big stuff, improv the details. Right, you play in the bones, and then you fill in the flesh while you play. The session end roll, this is a very cool thing. I did not use it in our one-shot just because our one-shot ended up going a little bit longer than we wanted to, it just didn't quite work for what they were trying to do in that adventure, or what it ended up happening in that adventure when we were improving all those details. We had to rewrite some of the big plan stuff because of what they decided to do. Isn't that always the way, though? So they have this cool thing where it's like, you're going to end the session, solve one of the oldest problems in tabletop gaming, when do we go home? You've read all about continual time, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So, when something big happens, like a supreme villain is defeated, or a character dies, or the group is clearly tired, it's time to roll the end of the session. You roll a d6, you throw out a 1, in that many rounds, the game is over for the night. Boom. That will make more sense. You might think that is insane as a D&D player. You're like, that is insane if you're ending in the middle of a combat to pick up the combat in the middle of it next time. You don't do that. You don't do that here. As somebody who has done that in D&D before, it is weird to get back into the middle of a fight. The continual time thing is what makes ICRPG different in Next Card RPG. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I didn't want to do that. But it does give you all this interesting stuff. Ultimate cliffhangers. Easy and hard cases. We talked about that. This is very much similar to like the... this is something that I've lifted. Hard rolls where you just take a DC and add 3 to it. Or if you want... Whatever they're doing seems to be particularly clever. You minus 3 to the DC, which is basically its version of the D&D advantage disadvantage mechanic. Target escalation. Things go harder. Using hearts, one of the things that's different is the heart system and effort. Turn orders, this is a cool one too. We'll talk about all this stuff, but I just kind of want to show off the art. And all this stuff is like, this is all stuff you can just incorporate. None of this stuff is really specific to this game. This is just good game mastery advice. Rewarding things, hero coins, which is their version of sort of inspiration, milestone rewards, dynamic dice, some optional rules and stuff to throw in the game. Using it as a plugin in other games gives you the options, like if you want to play D&D and you want to swap out maybe some of this stuff for D&D stuff. Story architecture. Here's how you make your adventure. There's your framework. 9 rooms. You fill in the chart. Index card RPG, as the name would suggest, is something that you use index cards for. Generally, it's to make this card deck. There are 4 compilations of cards, I believe now. So you've got a few hundred to choose from, and if you want to use all of them, you mix them up into a big deck, you deal them out on these specific notations, and that tells you something. You can use more than one card, only one card, however you want, and you use this as sort of like sparks for your Dungeon Master, Game Master mind about like what's going on in this. You go, okay, like this one at the beginning, you're like, okay, the first thing that this first room has something to do, or first encounter in the adventure has something to do with an eye beast, which is their copyright, legally distinct beholder, is the eye beast. You're like, oh, then does that mean you're gonna fight a beholder? What if you're only level 1 party? Not necessarily. It could mean like, oh, there's evidence that's about beholders here. Just something's related to beholder. You meet somebody who has a very stylized armor that's stylized like in the visage, like on their breastplate is a beholder or something like that carved into it. Something could be anything. You just kind of come up with that, or maybe you just go off. Oh, and there's like maybe there's the anti-magic zone eye. So maybe there's something like that. Like somebody's made a trap, like it's keeping a not beholder alive, and it looks around, and that's one of the things. Whatever you're fighting in the room, it points at stuff, and maybe you don't get to use your loot for that, or you're not able to use magic when you're inside its gaze, which is important in the game. So it's just an inspiration spot. And by the way, all the cards are free. You can go to runehammer.com. You can download the print and play stuff. I think there's a version of the Master Edition you can get, which is like 100 and something pages of the core rules that are free to download. You can get that if you want to try it out. Again, this is the second edition, so things will be a little bit different, but genuinely the same. How to build encounters. So again, watch the YouTube channel of Runehammer, really great. And they do more different stuff now, but the old videos are a lot of the stuff that ended up getting put in the Index Card RPG. The fine art of room design, do, danger, energy, wonder. This idea of like, oh, really good use of acronyms and stuff like that, and initialisms and things that'll mnemonic things to help you remember stuff. And your 3 ETs, your timers, your threats, and your treats, which is really great design for any game. Timers is like, oh, there's a doom counter and like something bad happens in X number of rounds. Player characters don't always know what that is. Sometimes you tell the players what it is. If it's very obvious, it'd be like, oh, the water is, and this room is filling with water. Once in 1d4 rounds, it's going to be full of water, and you're gonna have to be swimming rather than standing. Cool. You roll the d4, and it counts down every time it gets back to your turn as the GM. And then you're all in the water, or whatever you make it. That's just your timer. Your threat is the stuff that puts the player characters in dangers. It's, your monsters, your traps, etc. And your treats. What's the good stuff they get in for being in this room? For being in this encounter? This is where you put general loot in there, but also they learn something about the story. It could be a story beat and be like, oh, they uncover part of the mystery of this place. Oh, that's what they learned from this. All those sorts of things. And your damage, your disruption, and your duration for how to tune your challenge. So again, all this stuff is incredibly good stuff. And then the encounter archetypes. Oh man. It's worth getting the book if you're a new Dungeon Master or Game Master, or you want to become a little bit more tactical and you're playing, you're not quite sure maybe how to do that. This is a great place to start, is the encounter archetypes. Runehammer really outdid themselves with this. So you have the room design, creative doors, positive and negative space, and it all comes from very sort of like artist perspective, which is really cool because it's a very different way to approach a lot of things than how RPG advice is usually given out. So it's really cool to see it in a very different style that really helps it like click with people and seeing it in a different way. So your encounter archetypes, there's a barrier. You got to get through something. Tangle. And you'll see these red numbers next to that. We'll talk about those in a second. The lock. The kite. The pinch. And the ambush. So I'll just say the red dice basically tell you kind of how hard these things should be. So the kite, real difficult. Pinch. The ambush, and these are our examples. Siege, the tightrope. The alley kite, the duel. And gives you an option if you want to play with cards. They have a weird west setting, so if you want to instead stay on theme and be like, we're going to use playing cards, you can do that. You can play it with dice. Instead of dice, you can use cards, which is really fun. Follows basic blackjack scoring, so there's no reason you would ever want a 1, I think, on an ace. So it's always 11. Face cards are 10. Number cards are the value they are. Very fun. And then monsters, and again, Runehammer has such a very specific art style that's really fun. Really enjoy. So obviously we got our Drider there, our legally distinct Drider. Got our spider person. So let's talk about the one shot. Well, so one of the things I did is it was gonna be my players' first time brushing with the system. Didn't know anything about it. I didn't really prep them for it, and I built their characters for them. I just asked for their input to be like, hey, tell me what sort of D&D class you would play, and then I'll make the class. And then I gave them sort of the 5 different bioforms or ancestries. They call them bioforms in here. That you want to play. And there's like, oh, we're playing the Warp Shell one, because I was like, I want to run something sci-fi. We haven't done sci-fi in a minute. I think since the last time I ran something sci-fi, we pretty fancy hard. And though fantasy is my bread and butter, it's my steak and potatoes. I love it to death. But sometimes I just need a palate cleanse, and I just want to play some sci-fi. And as I told my players, I'm so desperate for somebody to run me through a Starfinder campaign. I love that system so much. And I want to... The issue is I want to play it. I don't want to run it. Not because I think that it's super difficult to run. It's just that is a system that's like, I enjoy being a player in that game. I don't necessarily want to run that game, but I really love playing in it. I've just got to convince some chucklehead to run it for me. So let's talk about... I'll pull up the adventures, and then we'll kind of get into... I'll start looking at my list, because this will become important. Alright, so yeah, I didn't prep them for that, and then built the characters for them, and then showed up, and then I just kind of explained the rules for them. I'm not going to show off the how to play section. If you want it, just go pick up the free rules. And you can find them, again, it's like, I think it's runehammer.com? Runehammer.games. Just look up Runehammer, and you'll find it, all one word. So, I did that. So what was our sort of reason for doing the one shot? So we had a player that dropped out. They have somebody in from out of town, so they kind of last minute cancellation on us then on like a Wednesday for our Friday game. I was like, oh, well, we're not going to play because unfortunately we've gotten to the point where it's like, oh, well, if one person's missing, now there's only 2 PCs that are there instead of 3. And that's, it's not only because 1/3 of the crew will miss the story, it's also like that just kind of becomes more difficult to do things like combat encounters. And try to, on the fly, rearrange that stuff in my brain. Which I didn't want to do, and I didn't want people to miss out on it because, again, we're in that nice festival episode. So I wanted everybody kind of there for it. I was like, okay, well, I'll just run a one-shot. I was like, well, okay, well, if I'm running a one-shot, why don't I do a system that I don't ever get to play? Since I'm the person who's running it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to offer to run it. And it's like, we can either skip this week, or we're going to play Index Card RPG. And so we decided... My 2 other players were like, yeah, we'll try it out. So that's sort of how we got into this whole situation. So let me tell you, I'm going to start off with the good stuff first. So first of all, players and myself really enjoyed it. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. Will we play it again? Absolutely. I think it was a good thing to jump into to do something that wasn't fantasy. Would I play the fantasy aspect over D&D? I don't know. I don't know if I would or not. I think it would be really hard to move people off D&D for a fantasy game. I think that's continually where people struggle, trying to get people to try new systems. Like, maybe get them to try like a sci-fi or a Call of Cthulhu or a modern or something else that's a horror game. Maybe something that's not also a fantasy. I think it's really hard to sell D&D players on another fantasy TTRPG. I think that's exceptionally more difficult. When they're much more likely to be like, hey, you guys want to play a cyberpunk game? And they'll be like, well, yeah, that sounds cool. So, but we all liked it. So, and let me talk about some of the things that the players at the end, asked them for their feedback, and they're like, oh yeah, we really liked the system. It was a lot of fun. I really like very specific things. So I want to go over some of the specific things they noted. Initiative. Okay. The continual time thing. So that's what we'll jump into first. So let's go to the how to play section and find that. Just to show it off. It's your turn. Nope. Results. Far. Checks attempts. Effort. Common checks. Attempts. movement, when distance, continual time. Here we go. Continual time section. I'll just read it and then we'll talk about it. Many RPGs separate combat time, which is very detailed, down to free time, which is very loose. Not ICRPG. ICRPG is always in turns. You are always in initiative, no matter what you are doing. Which I think was one of the things that was really hard for the players to grok really quickly. They always wanted to, especially I have one specific player, and they do this in all the games we play. Doesn't matter if it's this system or not, where they'll be like, I want to do this one thing, and then they have like, will often state like 2 or 3 contingencies on top of that, and I'm like, okay, you're describing like a 20-minute thing, so let's what is the one thing you want to do? So it was nice to have a mechanical way to be like, let's focus up on doing the specific thing, and then once we know that next piece of information, then we can decide what to do after that. It also means that like whether you're in combat or not in combat, everybody always has their moment. Nobody gets kind of like lost by the wayside. Really cool. And the great thing is that this is part of the initiative too. So everything's always in time. So you're always in initiative, which means that you can always use those timers that count down. We'll talk more about those in a second. But you can always use that, and they work really, really well. And so it's always going on. The clock is always ticking. It has that feeling, and it feels really cool. Not in a like Doom sort of way, but more like, oh, we can't screw around too much because bad stuff keeps happening the more we screw around. And it's not super bad, like it will kill you stuff usually. Usually it's like a nuisance, but it is stuff that we do have to deal with. So maybe we kind of hustle, we kind of hurry up. Because you're always in turns, and so turns are in moments, which is like the 5 to 10 second turn that we know from combat in D&D. Otherwise you go into sort of hours between battles. It's 1 to 3 hours per turn. So if you're like, oh, we dropped out of that and now we're exploring this dead spaceship, which was the case in the adventure I ran, you're like, oh, well, every time that you guys are just kind of searching through things, moving through the corridors and sticking your heads into different bulkhead rooms and looking around, that takes 1 to 3 hours of you guys just kind of going door by door through the ship looking for stuff. And then you move into days, which is sort of between adventures. So because it's one shot, didn't get to incorporate this. But then it's like, even when you do downtimes are in turns, which is kind of cool. Really fun. I do think that there's like a little pressure on the player. It puts a little pressure on the players to be like, you need to know what you're going to do when it comes up. But the good thing is that the game is so digestible. Because turns are like, you get to do a thing and move, or just move. So having it be like, oh, you only have to decide on one action. There's not a standard action and a bonus action and free actions and stuff like that. It's like, no, you get to do like a thing. Now, if you're like, oh, I pulled something out of my pocket while I walk down that way, it's like, okay, well, that's not an action. But you can walk further, or once you get there, you can try to do something once you get there if you have anything to do. And if you don't have anything to do, you'll be like, I wait. Or I wait for my player. And even though there's not readied actions in the game, were things that would be like, oh yeah, you could ready an action to do something on their turn if you're waiting for them to do something. Or they do things like, can I help them with that? And they're like, yeah, and then they get the +3 to their roll or -3 to the DC. Effectively the same thing. So continual time is really, really cool. And it took them a little bit to get into it, but once they got into it, they really, really liked it. They always knew what was going to happen. It was like, okay, I go, then you go, and then you go, and then I go, and then you go, and you go. And that we just keep... Everything works around the table that way. So when you guys are exploring, this is what you do. You guys always... There's always this idea, is like, I need to be thinking about what I'm going to do next, even when I'm not in combat. Which is cool. Like, once they got into it, it keeps the... As I hit the mic again. It keeps the cadence of the game running really nicely. There's always like this tempo. It's like, oh, we're always going. We're always going. There's not like a lot of pressure like we have to snap like we are in combat usually in like D&D, where like, please don't take up a lot of time on your turn because combat takes so long to get through. Not the case with ICRPG. And everything's in turns already. So another thing is the initiative. Initiative's in here. So you don't actually roll for initiative in ICRPG, which seems weird because you're always in initiative. Where's it? Nope. Not in here. It's actually not in the how to play section. That's okay. I can tell you what it is. because there's an illustration of it in here somewhere. Oh, it's in the game mastery section. Sorry. We passed it, didn't we? There it is. So, just like a board game or card games, they're like, well, you don't roll for initiative. It just goes clockwise from the GM. And so it's really how you arrange yourselves at the physical game table as to who goes when. So it kind of gives you this idea down here about what players have found to be kind of like the optimal seating for them. It's like, oh, you want your tank to go first because they can absorb those opening attacks and do the battle stuff. Rogues like to leap ahead and get the first kill on that second one. So what the tanks kind of hurts them a bit, and then the rogue jumps in and gives them a little extra stab and kills them off. It's your magic user who kind of goes third. Control or alter the field from battlefield. And then last you put your healer at the end, so they have the classic tactic to ensure some recovery before the GM goes again. The classic, well, you want the healer to go last because if the healer goes first and nobody's hurt, there's nothing for the healer to do except flail at enemies, which are usually not very good at. That's generalizing. Obviously, you can make lots of clerics or druids that are really, really good at fighting, but if their primary purpose is to heal, it's best for them to be last, which is good because they usually roll low in initiative in D&D, and they usually work best there. But the idea that it just solves that and we never had to roll for initiative, it felt so, because you're always in turns, the switch between exploration mode and combat mode is so fluid that you don't even have to, we never felt like we needed to explain, okay, you guys went from turns taking an hour to turns taking 10 seconds. Like, it just became very apparent. It's like, oh, a monster shows up. We start fighting the monster. Obviously, each turn does not represent an hour of that time. And yet, as soon as the enemy is defeated, we immediately just drop back into that exploration time. And you're like, oh, it just feels really natural. And time, unless you make the specific time of day important, which ICRPG doesn't really do by default, and they really don't actually need to keep track of it very much. Unless you're doing, the only time that you need to know which turn you're in is when you're doing healing, because it changes how you do the recovery action. Every character has the ability to heal themselves a little bit. And the thing is like, it's unlimited healing. You can just keep spamming it. But every time that you spam it, more rounds go by. Timers count down. Bad stuff happens to you. So it still keeps you from being like, oh, I sit in the corner and I just take the recovery action until I'm up to full hit points. It's like, cool, you guys can do that, but you're going to get at least one of these timers is going to run down, maybe two of them, maybe even three, depending on how I roll. And so is it worth taking 3 rounds of potentially bad things happening to you? Ooh, no, probably not. So I'll take 1 recovery action and then we'll keep moving. That sounds more appropriate. Also, they're aware of the timer, so they know how many rounds they have until it goes down, so they can tactically think about what they want to do when. So if they're like, oh, we have 4 rounds until it counts down, yeah, we'll take like 2 rounds doing recovery actions just to kind of heal up a little bit, take a breather. Like, yeah, you guys find a bulkhead and you sit down on the bunk and take a rest and bandage yourself up and, you know, just kind of fiddle with your gear and maintain it and stuff, and then you're ready to go before something bad happens. So yeah, it even says down here in disrupting time, in 3 rounds another Colossus will be assembled. That's your timer counting down. So yeah, they really love the initiative, and I did too. Even for out of combat, actually especially for out of combat stuff, because again, it makes sure that everybody has an option to do something when they're in exploration. They're talking to, even though there wasn't any talking really. But like, everybody has an opportunity to do something even when they're not in combat, and doesn't feel like, oh, you kind of skip over somebody, or that feeling that sometimes you have with groups where one player just kind of like takes the bull by the horns and just kind of like pulls everybody along with them, and they kind of take center stage in specific areas of the game. When you're always in turns, that just doesn't happen. They can't really force people to do stuff or get carried away, and people get forgotten. Ooh, they like the fast fights. So fights are pretty quick. Pretty much every TTRPG combats go by faster than D&D. D&D is one of the slowest, with the exception of maybe Pathfinder. Definitely one of the slowest. And some D100 systems, depending on what you're doing, are also slow. But ICRPGs has that very sort of like OSR feeling to it. It's like, it's your turn, you do a thing, you roll some damage, we move on. Next person. Just because there's not a ton to do, there's not a ton of decisions to make. There's not a lot of super tactical kind of things to do. There's no floating modifiers and stuff like that you really need to worry about. So things just go by very quickly. Now, like I said, when we're talking about how to make combats more entertaining and more challenging, they can get stale. We did have one encounter that started to feel a little stale just because we had like 3 rounds of people just missing each other. You're like, okay, it's your turn. I roll my die, I miss. Your turn, I roll my die, I miss. My turn, I roll my die, miss. Countdown timer goes by 1. Your turn. So sometimes, like, if nothing's happening, the narrative's not super interesting. But if you have a high DC room, that can hurt. But you can always just make the DC easier, which I probably should have done at one point. Should have gone beyond that, just -3 to the DC, and just kept taking it down. But yeah, they loved how fast the fights were. And they loved how, I know that my gunner really loved how powerful their thing was. Their gun was, they have this burst unit that allows them to basically, for every hit, they basically get to roll damage 3 times, and then assign it to whoever they hit. Because it's 1 attack roll, and then you can assign it to 3 different enemies, 2 enemies, 2 on 1. You can burst fire into 1 creature if you want, and just assign them all to 1 creature. So, as a character whose class was Gunner, it felt really good to just be like, oh yeah, you just absolutely unload on creatures when you use the burst fire module. So it felt really good. It's just like, oh, you just... And then sometimes when you miss those attacks, you're like, I'm going to do burst fire, and they miss the attack, and it'd be like, you just pray and spray. So you just kind of close your eyes and go, and just fire your gun off into the down the corridor. Because we were doing the sci-fi thing. So, I guess you would do that with a bow, maybe. But we're playing warp shell classes, so probably doesn't play. Though they do say that you can mix and match. So if you wanted to have your characters somehow got transported to ye old fantasy land, and they have guns, their guns will work, and you could do stuff like that. Now they could run out of ammunition. Maybe that's something you work on. You know what? That assumes you're trying to run like a campaign of this, rather than a one-shot. Oh, they really like the countdown timer. Yeah, the countdown timer is great. This is a countdown timer is something I have lifted out of ICRPG a long time ago. And they're not even the first person to do it. I think the first time I came across it was 13th Age is the first time I saw it, which is a while ago. And that was, they called it an escalation die. And so basically it's a D6 that sits on the table, and every time a round goes by in combat, the D6 goes up by 1, and that number gets added to everything you roll. So it gets added to saves, it gets added to attack rolls, it gets added to damage rolls. The idea being, like, the longer you're in combat, the more deadly combat becomes. Suddenly you have like +6 to all your damage, +6 to all hit on everything. And actually, I think you apply it to DCs, not saves. So they'd be like, oh, the DCs get more difficult, so suddenly, like, even if you guys are missing a bunch, it becomes easier to hit things, you deal more damage. It kind of, the longer combat goes, the more lethal it gets, which is very interesting. So countdown timers are kind of like that. The countdown timers, you roll a d4, and you set it on the table in front of everybody. Which is one of the things ICRPG does, is you just kind of just tell the players stuff. Like that, like you tell them the DCs for things up front. You tell them, oh, this is how many hit points this creature has. And it works. It works. It works out pretty well. You would think maybe that would be a little disruptive, kind of take players out of it, but not really. Surprisingly, not really. So they like the timer with always in initiative, and then always feeling like, oh, I know something's going to happen, even if I don't necessarily know what it is. Sometimes if it's really clear, I just tell them what it is. Like in this, or once they get used to it and be like, oh yeah, the solar flare is going to happen in 2 rounds. And then there are some things that's like, oh, I rolled a 4 on the D4, and they're like, great, we're not going to see a solo share for 4. It's like, ooh, actually in this room, when I roll a 4 on the countdown timer, something else happens. You actually have a worse thing that happens, and they're like, no! So you can mix it up too. So it was really fun. So it always felt like there was stuff coming down the pike at them, even if they didn't know what it is. Or sometimes they thought they would know what it would be, but then it would change depending on where they were in the adventure. Countdown timer's not always the same thing. But having things in initiative and the countdown timer always going always felt like there was that pressure that you kind of always want to put on players. Be like, you got to keep moving forward. Oh, and they really enjoyed the dying rolls. I didn't know if this was going to come up in the adventure, and it definitely did. So the dying rolls. Let's take a look at that. And they've got to be in the how to play, right? The dying rules are very kind of similar to normal D&D, is that you're going to roll, you get knocked down to 0 hit points, you start, and on your turn you're going to roll a d20. It's not a death save, though. It's slightly different. Types of checks, distance, time, scoring. Death and dying, there we go. Okay, I'll just read it out. So, when you're reduced to 0 hit points, you are now dying. You are unconscious, bleeding out, and running out of time. On your next turn after being dropped, roll a d6. In that many of your turns, you are irrevocably stone cold dead. So it's a cool thing. You roll it in front of the table so everybody knows how long you have. Instead of like the D&D thing with death saves, where it's like, oh, we'll roll it and I made a save. I didn't make the save. And you made your saves. You made 3 saves in 4 rounds of combat, and now you're just fine. This does a thing which I already do in D&D now. It's like, even if you're stabilized, you still get to roll the d20 on your turn. If you roll the natural 20, you still get to stand up with 1 hit point. That's how it works here. On your turn, you roll 1 d20. You stand up. If you roll a natural 20, you get your 1 hit point. I like this better. I think it always at least gives the person who's unconscious something to do on their turn. And I like having the d6 where you have this finite knowledge of, if I don't do something for this character in this many rounds, they are going to die unless they roll a natural 20. Like, I've got to do it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no, well, they might make their death saves and they'll be fine. It's like, no, and you can roll a 1 on that and be like, man, on their next turn, they're smoked. So you need to get there and do something for them now. And it kind of puts the urgency on the players, which I thought was really, really cool. Really, really leans into that. And because you roll the d6 and you just put it on the character sheet, which is really nice. It's tactile, it's fun. Everybody can look at it and everybody knows. When it's your turn, you roll your d20. I rolled a 7. Okay, you pick up your d6 and you move it down a notch. You be like, all right, I got 2 more rounds. Please help me. And then you can take so much damage that you are reduced to negative 20 hit points or worse. In a single hit, you are blown to pieces. There isn't even a corpse. So I changed this slightly because it's really hard to do negative 20 hit points of damage in this system. Like, extremely difficult. Like even just ordinary, like even crits won't do that to you unless there's something special going on. So because the way the damage dice work, there's no even damage die that would get you to negative 20 hit points in one shot. So I changed that a little bit and be like, oh, 20 hit points total, because there is a monster in the adventure we're running that will attack down creatures. So I was like, well, that's kind of just a silly thing to do if they're not gonna. There's not actually a threat that they're going to be able to do minus 20 hit points of damage in 1 round. So instead, it'd be like, okay, well, they do attack you. And we'll just add it up. So yeah, I like this system better. This is a system that I would just hard swap out for the D&D's death save mechanics. I like this system a lot. My players liked it a lot. The most important thing that I want to talk about, though, is the stop the dying countdown aspect. So we'll just read it. To stop the dying countdown, an ally must reach you and help. They reach out, hold your head up, apply pressure, and say, "Don't die on me, man." And you have to say that. They must make a wisdom or intelligence roll to succeed. The simple act will halt the countdown. That's how you stabilize people, essentially. That's ICRPG's stabilize action. Is that you have to roll, and you have to hold them and be like, "Don't die on me, man." Like I said, some of this has some of these fun, like, theatrical flares to be like, kind of be like, oh, you need to roleplay this. So you run over there, and so we had Bob run over to the downed reptoid character, the gunner, put his hand on him and be like, don't die on me, man. Which is really fun. Everybody really enjoyed it. There was also a magic item that they didn't come across that's in the book. I'll just talk about it real quickly because it was another one of these things where you get to do that. It's like a tabard. It's like a magical tabard. If you don't know what the tabard is, that's the weird thing that knights wear that drapes in between their legs. The weird piece of cloth. That's a tabard. Anyways, I'm not going to look it up, but I do know what it does. Basically, what it allows you to do is that if you are the character wearing this and you say, huzzah! And anybody else around the table who's one of the player characters respond with, huzzah! So you go, huzzah! They go, huzzah! They all get to roll easy on their next attempt. So they all get -3 to the DC on their next attempt. So you should be running around every turn being like, huzzah! Huzzah! Which is very, very cool to have like a knight's tabard who just runs around, have a knight that runs around screaming huzzah. So it felt very thematic and gives you this cool thing. And there's a mechanical benefit for doing this silly bit of roleplay, which is very fun. I wish there was a little bit more of that kind of stuff in some TTRPGs. It also tells you a lot about the tone of ICRPG and be like, we're playing a silly game of like ghosts and goblins. It's fine. You run around and you yell at each other. And it's very dramatic. In a melodrama kind of way. It's silly. So that was most of the things the players like. Okay, some of the things that the players really kind of stumbled with. Let's talk about that. First off, skills. There's no skills in the game. So, it's ability checks only. Let's get down here. I think there is some character sheets here in the back. Yeah, there's a character sheet in the back. So you'll notice there's no skills on here. You ain't got no skills. Lieutenant Dan, you ain't got no skills. So that was the hard thing to kind of grok for people who primarily have only played 5e 2024 for the most part. But very quickly kind of it just became, okay, that's just an intelligence check. And then we did have one character who had a toolkit with them, which gave them +3 to their effort when they are doing, they had a hacker kit. So +3 whenever they're trying to hack things. So then it gives you the ability to be like, okay, well then if I hack things, anything that deals with effort, even though we haven't talked about effort, it allows them to add +3 to their effort, which is big. Because usually for something like that, they're using this D4. So adding a +3 to a D4 is a big difference if you have the right thing for it. Now let's talk about effort a little bit. So effort's one of the things where ICRPG differs quite a bit from D&D. So you know in D&D how we have things like hit points, and so when you're in a combat encounter, you attack the monster and you deal damage to him. ICRPG just lifts that mechanic, attack things, deal damage, and just applies it to everything. Oh, you want to not everything. Like there are things in which you just do simple checks, but things that are prolonged, what you might consider things like a skill challenge. Be like, oh, if you want to get through the door has 10 hit points, and you can do that if you want to do effort against it because you're going to lockpick it. And let's say you have lockpick hit, and so you roll that. You met the DC, then you do that D4 plus your 3 for lockpicking. And you're trying to hit a 10, so obviously this is going to take more than one action from one character. Or another round's going to go by. If the round goes by, that countdown timer ticks down again. So you do want to do things quickly, but you could be like, it's broad, so you can at the same time have the character trying to lockpick the door, and then having your big broody barbarian just being like, I just tried to kick the door in. Because we're just trying to get through the door, so it doesn't matter who gets through it. And so they kick through the door, unless you... The only difference being like, well, if we want to use the door later, maybe don't have the barbarian break it down. So maybe we don't want them to break it down. And so that's maybe why we let the rogue, pick the lock. That would be a different reason. But they can also do help actions and stuff like that to help them to lower the DCs, make it more likely that they're going to hit. Which a DC is just the effort AC which was a little bit different to kind of like warp their brain around. It's like everything just deals damage in shorthand. It's not actual damage like you deal damage to it, but it's like abstracted hit points. So you guys have to keep doing stuff against it. That was one of the stumbling blocks. Being concise in the one action framework. Yeah, it's kind of hard to go from D&D where you have like action, bonus action, free actions, no actions, and movement. Being like, nope, you have the ability to move and do a thing. And that's it. It was really hard for them to like really compress what they wanted to do down is that. They got to it eventually, but it did take probably like half the adventure before they really kind of started to get it. I think if we played more, they'd be on it from now on. They get it. It's like, no, it's just the one thing. What are you doing right now? And it's not like, oh, well, I want to walk down here and I want to check this out. And then I also want to check this out and do this and be like, okay, you're doing a thing. What is the thing you're doing? Just to kind of keep things quick and snappy. Gear. Oh, yeah. They struggle with gear a little bit. I'm gonna chalk most of that up to my poor handwriting. Because I had to do handwritten character sheets because I couldn't find a good form fillable one. That was for the second edition. There's some for the master edition, but I couldn't find one for the second edition. I had to write everything in by hand, and so they had to deal with my chicken scratch handwriting. So I'm gonna take most of that, but also this idea, unlike D&D, where a lot of the characters' powers are based around like their spells or their abilities. Like in ICRPG, it's all about the loot, baby. So it's all about your gear. And so it was hard. They struggled a little bit to be like, oh, right, I got to remember to look at my gear and what the specific things that my gear allow me to do. Because those are basically my character abilities, for the most part. Each of them had things like the burst fire module, but it's only on one gun. But you can use it all the time. You just have to tell me that you're using it. There's no limited resource on that. Which is one of the things I think they changed in the Master Edition system, because it's super, super powerful to have a character that can just do 3 times as much damage as other characters every single turn. By just being like, I do this thing. So that's a little bit different. So yeah, it took them a little bit to kind of get to it, but it took longer than I expected. Let's put it that way. They got it, they understood it, but there was a situation that was like, oh man, if we only had some sort of like tether or something. There's an aspect of that early on in the game. If they had some way to tether to get past this thing or use this thing, and be like, is there anything like that around? And then I had to like point at the player who's asking me that their character sheet and be like, well, it says down here you have a rope and hook, so yeah, you got that. And be like, oh yeah. So, and it's not like they had a ton of gear. They have like 7 items of gear to start off, so it's not a ton. But it was one of those weird things. A little difficult for them to understand levels and advancement. Like I said, there's no actual levels. They were like, oh, so how do level ups work? And I was like, well, there's not really any levels ups. And they're like, well, how do we increase stuff? And I was like, well, you already did it. You guys picked up a Heartstone immediately in the game, which doubled your hit points. Like, it's stuff like that. You pick that up. You have there are items that you can pick up that increase your stats. Never your base stats. It's always going to be your loot. That's why all these things on here have loot next to them, because you can add loot to those. But your base isn't going to change. Generally, I think there are some ways, there are like some spells and stuff like that that will, or items that are one-use items that are like, those will increase your base. But generally, it's your loot and what you have equipped, and you can only have 10 items equipped. So you have to decide what you're going to wear sometimes. But you will have so much loot that you can have up to 10 things equipped all the time. So that did take a little bit to get around. Trying to understand the levels and advancement of that aspect and be like, oh, it's just the stuff we get. It's like, yeah, it's literally just the stuff you get. Distances, yeah. So this is not necessarily specifically about ICRPG. This is really trying to get anybody who's familiar with D&D to play a not D&D game that uses somewhat abstracted distances. This will be in the how to play section. Let's find the banana scale. So, ICRPG uses the banana scale. There it is. Down here at the bottom. So you have ranges of distances. So close, which is basically adjacent. Near, which is stuff that's basically within a move, which for ICRPG is about 50 feet. Far is stuff that's beyond that. So some guns, really good at shooting far. And we had a guy with a spear, so he can fight in this near area, so he doesn't have to be close to them. And then close is basically in melee. So a spear is a long weapon, so they're able to like reach out and stab somebody further. So it took them a little bit to get used to the abstracted distances. They're a little bit different than the standard like 30, 60, 120 of D&D 5e 2024. Longer than I thought it would take them. I'm very familiar. I really like playing Theater of the Mind, so I use abstract distances all the time. I think of things like within a move, within 2 moves, and that's pretty much what this is. So you can move up to anything that's in near distance and take an action. If you want to go far, which is anything further than that, you have to basically dash. So you use your entire action to move, essentially. And they use the banana for scales for how to tell whether something is near or not. So imagine a banana on the table, or put a banana on the table if you have a banana. That's about near distance. So, nice and easy, but it just... Again, this is not an ICRPG thing before. I've seen this happen with players in other games too. It's just anytime that you start introducing a more abstracted distance, players kind of, if they're only used to D&D stuff, will kind of give that dog head cock where they're like, what? I don't understand. They kind of confused look. So it just takes a little extra teaching. Yeah, so those are the things where I felt like the players really stumbled. The things that surprised me for the players, things that surprised me about the players, that they didn't miss advantage, disadvantage. Didn't even come up once. I gave them a disadvantage on one roll because they tried to do something really, really silly, and I'm like, -3 is not enough. So it's going to be -3, and you're going to roll a disadvantage because you were... To put in context, they were in the engine room, and they were like, oh, this the terminal here is been password locked by the captain. I'm like, okay. I tried to do some hacking about it. I didn't roll very well on the hacking. And it's like, you've been locked out. 3 more attempts. Sorry, I didn't do the attempts thing there. And they're like, I did the hacking, didn't work. Then the other character came up who didn't want to do an intelligence check. And was like, what if I just like try to punch in the password randomly and see what happens? And I'm like, okay, see, we can't just have you roll a d20 for that, because what you're asking to do is absolutely insane. To be like, you went up there and smashed your hand on the keypad and somehow it opened up. That is insane. And a -3 does not represent that in the DC. So we're going to do -3, and you're going to roll a disadvantage, because I'm okay saying, like, for some reason this works. But it has to be such a slim chance that it is incredibly insane that this happens. It's totally bonkers that it happens. Obviously did not roll well. That didn't happen. And then was got the notice that they had locked out. 2 attempts left. And the other player's character is like, what are you doing? Stop doing that. Stop touching that. You're going to lock us out of the system while I try to get this thing open. So that was fun. But yeah, they didn't really miss the advantage disadvantage. And they were pretty flexible with being like, oh, can I get some cover? Sure, yeah, you'll get a +3 to your AC. Cool. Oh, you've already tried this thing before, so now you know what you're looking for, so we're going to -3 on that DC to make it a little bit easier. That stuff felt very fluid, really went into it. I was really surprised that they didn't try to get advantage or disadvantage, or try to push for that specific D&D mechanic, because it's so ubiquitous that people like to add it to other systems. Or get used to it because it's so elegant. It's such elegant game design and so simple that you want to throw it in other games that don't have it. Let's see. Oh, they like the natural 20 ultimate die. Okay, so let's go back to the character sheet. The character sheet shows it. So anytime that you're doing, I said, like, if you were doing the tool check, you roll a d4 plus a toolkit if you have a toolkit. Oh, here we go. Yeah, we'll use this guy. Why not? This is the sheet I was actually using. So if you rolled your thing, let's say you were trying to do that hacking attempt, and you passed the DC, so you want to roll the effort on it. You'd roll your D4 plus 3 for your hacker kit if you had a hacker kit. Otherwise, it's just the D4. But if you roll a natural 20, unlike D&D where you just kind of like double your damage die, instead of rolling like 2D4 or something like that, you immediately get to roll a D12 instead. So if you hit with a weapon, you instead of doing the weapon damage die, which is a D6 here, or the magic die, which is a D8, or you're doing your basic like skill kind of check thing, rolling that D4, you get to roll the D12, which is super cool. And they were like, oh yeah, I get to roll the D12, which is good because the D12 needs a little love and attention because we don't ever give it any love and attention in D&D because it doesn't get used very often. So having the ability to be like, oh, I get to use this cool die that we only get to use whenever we hit a natural 20. Or there are very specific things that allow you to roll the ultimate die. One of which they picked up during this adventure was monofilament, so that you could use to garrote somebody with this monofilament wire. And if you do that, they're like, it always does ultimate damage, monofilament wire. So they found a way to use that during the adventure, which was really cool too. You're like, ooh, how do I get a chance to roll that ultimate die? So they did that and took that on. So that was really fun. I like that they enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting them to be like, oh, I get to roll a different die. I thought they'd be like, oh, don't they just do like max damage or double damage or something like that? I was like, nope, you get to roll a totally different die. And they really liked that, which I wasn't expecting. Ooh, they really enjoyed the simple DCs and ACs. Before I talk about that, I just want to talk about the quickness to pick up the rules. They picked up the rules really, really quickly, for the most part. All things considered, considering I threw a bunch of different stuff, like the timer stuff, they picked up really quickly. The initiative stuff, I said, took a little bit longer, but like I said, it's kind of a big departure from D&D. But all the other D&D stuff is so close to D&D. Roll 1d20, everything you're trying to hit is a DC or an AC. Perfectly made. They liked the room DC, so one of the big differences with ICRPG is that every room you basically set a DC for. You go, okay, you guys bust into the med bay. The med bay is DC 13. Everything you do in this room, you're trying to hit a 13. So if you're trying to hack into the terminal, DC 13. If you're trying to fight one of the mutated reptoids in here, their AC is 13. And it's very cool. So this is something I've lifted from ICRPG, just like the timers, and I use in D&D all the time. If you see me do some of my adventure prep stuff, you've seen that before, and I've talked about pulling it from this system. It's just like, okay, the DC for this room is 12. So whenever they're making perception checks in this room, the DC is 12. If they are trying to, or there's a trap in here that goes off and they need to make a dexterity save, the DC is 12. And then using that plus or minus 3 or plus or minus 2 or 5, using a plus or minus and be like, this would be something easier. Just knock down the DC a little bit. Or the thing that you're trying to do seems like it's pretty difficult, so I'm going to add 3 to the DC. But they really I was surprised that they liked that you just tell them the DC for the room immediately upon basically entering. Be like, okay, just like the timers out there, and they always know where the countdown timer's at. You just tell them the DC up front and be like, okay, this is the room, and it's DC 12. So that's what you're trying to hit. And they just know it up front, and they're like, cool, got it. Here's what I want to do. Or they'd be like, DC 12, and then they look down their stats and be like, okay, I'm pretty good at this. But I also think maybe I'll try this other thing, because I know what the DC is, and the likelihood I'm going to roll 12 or higher on the D20 is pretty okay. It's not terrible odds. And try to go for that, especially if they have some sort of bonus in it. So it was really nice. They really picked that up. Bring us to pick up the rules in general, and then on top of that, being able to use things like the simple DCs that they grok really, really easily, and understanding that also means AC. Also, while it didn't come up in this adventure, I think would come up with a more proficient group who was into the system and played it for a few sessions. You'd realize, oh, when we're fighting monsters, if there's a way that we can move the monsters to an easier DC room, that makes life better on us, because as you see up here at the very top of the sheet, let me move up, you've got armor. So the player characters have static ACs. Their AC is always like 13 or 15 or whatever it is. The monsters' ACs change depending on what room they're in, because they've used the DC formula. Let's pull up some monsters just so you can see just what a stat block kind of looks like. Okay, monsters, not game mystery. Here we go. So the Agnar here rolls +5 to strength, +3 to all other stats. So you notice no AC on here and just these 3 hearts. So 3 hearts, and they use the heart system. I'm not sure this technically works for what Runehammer was trying to do with it. I appreciate the visual flair, but essentially all they're saying is that this creature has 30 hit points. Each heart is just 10 hit points, and that's just how you measure monsters. Or challenges that you do effort on in general is by heart. So the default is 1 heart, which is 10 hit points. Or effort points, whatever you want to call them. So this monster has 3. And it was cool to be able to be like, oh, this monster has 4 hearts. And then players would be like, oh, that's a ton of hearts. This is going to be a really tough monster. Just being able to just kind of like do that aspect from the DM was really cool. But for this guy, you'll notice that there's no AC on here. There's no saves or anything like that. Doesn't matter. That's determined by the room they're in. So there is an option that like a proficient party would be like, oh, we move out of this corridor that has DC 12 into the engine room that's DC 16. And then we get into a fight with this Crabicite, which is a crab parasite, massive mutated crab. Kind of probably looks somewhat like this Agnar creature. And be like, oh, if you could bait that creature to move rooms from the engine room back into the corridor, it would lower their AC by 4 points. And so there is that tactical aspect of being like, we could like try to kite this monster back into a room that's easier for us to fight it on. That also includes like when you pick up items and you want to do something with the item, like you're trying to investigate an item, you can literally pick it up, move to a different room, and then decide that you want to look at it in this room, and that makes it easier. Which is a cool bit of like, it kind of gives you the idea that like, oh, you can always just kind of move around. But every time you move around and you're not doing that stuff, like the countdown timer goes down, more bad stuff kind of happens. Pressure. So there's always like this tug of war kind of being like, do I do this now? Do I hold on to it and try it later? Because I think I'll fail if I try it in this room. So I'm going to take it to a different room where I think I will be easier in. The next time we're going through that room or we circle back, let's stop it. I'll stop in there for 1 turn and figure this thing out. Even if that means splitting up the party sometimes, which is a cool way to split up the party, but keep them somewhat close to each other. Because they could end up in a different room having to talk to somebody, or getting involved with a monster they weren't expecting. Or being stuck in a weird position because of the countdown timer. Which, like I said, the countdown timer is sometimes different depending on what room they're in, what happens. So, if the countdown timer hits 0, and they're in 3 different rooms, there may be 3 different effects. Each one hit by a different effect depending on the room they're in. If they decide to, scatter like cockroaches like my players always do, and they always run in different directions, it's like they're allergic to each other. They all have the same either positive or negative charge, and so if you try to push them together, they will just immediately run away from each other. Yeah, let's get into so that the simple DCs were really good. Really liked it. So now I want to talk about some of the things I didn't like when I was running it. First of all, and we're going to get it out of the way, is the adventure. There's a reason we haven't really talked about the adventure very much, and I'll show you why. And I really didn't catch it until I started running it. So I did this one, which is the first one, which is Last Flight of the Red Sword. That's it. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 pages. It's an 8-page adventure, essentially. Smaller. You guys can kind of see a full page here. It was very weird trying to run it, and I think that these don't necessarily work super great as sample adventures, because there's one thing key thing that's missing in the book. That I remember, at least when I was trying to hurry prep, which means if I couldn't find it in the game mastery section, it means it's not pointed out blatantly enough. They don't really give you a lot of ideas as to how to set an appropriate room DC. Like how to manage that. They don't really do that. And you'll notice in here, so this has the different rooms in it, or different scenes. So your arrival, docking bay, corridor, bridge, science bay, medical module, ion engines. Those are the 7 rooms that are in here. So you'll notice on each one of them, they don't tell you what the DC is, which means that you as the DM have to make up the DC. But also the book doesn't tell you how to appropriately make up a DC or try to dial that in very well. Even in the place where it talks about dials, like the duration, stuff like that, it doesn't give you a ton of information. So that is one thing where I felt like it just fell apart. Also, it somehow in 8 pages gives me way too much information and then not really specific information on how to run things. An example like this. So the first fight they're probably going to get into is the bridge fight. So let's just read the bridge entry. Bridge. The ship's con explodes with reptoid ceiling runners. Their uniforms are torn to shreds and they've been twisted into a more terrible, ravenous form. A galleon-style helm, which means like a big like wheel, because this is a pirate ship. It's silly. It's their first big battle with the mutant reptoids. And the nav systems are set for the core of the Dark Star. So they understand kind of what's going on with the ship. Now, lots of information missing here. Obviously, we don't have the DC for the room. That's kind of the big one. The second big one is it doesn't tell you how many reptoids I'm supposed to put in here. We have the monster, but it doesn't tell us how many I should be putting in this room. I was like, should I put 1 in this room? Do they fight like 5? I know how many player characters I have, but I don't know how many monsters. And you didn't tell me how many player characters are assumed to be in the party for this adventure. I assume 4, but you also didn't tell me how many monsters should be in it for 4, so I don't know how to adjust it for only 2. So I was like, I looked at the mutant reptoids, and again, the stat blocks are pretty bare bones. The only thing that's important to note is of every 4 mutant reptoids encountered, at least 1 of them will be mutated almost beyond function with only 1 hit point, and can be killed with a simple check. Their gooey bones and shedding skin flops into a biologic protogel as they perish. So I was like, okay, so ideally they could beat up to 4 of them. So what ended up happening is I just had them roll a d4. They rolled a 3, and so they fought 3 of them, which was a tough fight, but they were able to get through it. I do think if I was running this adventure again, I would probably only put 2 in there. I'd probably put 1 per PC, which felt fair-ish. Maybe slightly less than 1 per PC. So 1 would have been a fight, but 3 was a pretty tough fight. And that's one of the fights that took a longer time, just because there were a few rounds of just like miss, which made things difficult. Even after I tried to lower the DCs for stuff. Should have just lowered it more though. So yeah, and so the adventure is not great. It also like doesn't tell you what to use for the timer, kind of. You're like, oh, it feels like it should be this black matter sun thing, solar flare thing is what I should be doing as the countdown timer. And this is where you get into the devil in the details. Gives you like this big thing of stuff that they could find, and this never a moment's peace, which is like for the kind of countdowns, I guess. This is like what you can do for time stuff. Solar flares, not just heat, but waves of pure evil. Every 1d4 rounds, all heroes dex check for or fall for 1 damage. So I did that one throughout most of it. There were a few times I did some of the other stuff, but it didn't tell me what to put as the timer, which I thought it. Let me put it this way. So this book has a lot of GM advice and a lot of advice on like how to build the encounters, and then when it shows you an adventure, it doesn't use any of that information to show you how to. It doesn't provide any of that information, so it doesn't really give you examples in the adventures to do it. So really I got a bunch of fluff, and I still kind of have to make the adventure myself. which I'm not sure is super useful as an adventure, and especially not as a sample adventure. You're assuming like people who are running this, it is their very first time running the game, maybe even looking at trying to play it at all, and then you provide adventures that don't really help you do that. And all the adventures are like that. They're all like that. So here's Doom Vault. There's like 6 adventures in here, and you have the same things. And where they're like, they tell you a bunch of stuff. They tell you where things are, the Dens of Doom, the Invincibles, Osric Gate, the different kind of areas, the Big Swim, but doesn't tell you like what the DCs are for any of the rooms, what the countdown timer should be, what the retreats. Instead, at least in the one, it does give you at least advice on how to put loot in here. It did do that. Loot. Keep 1 loot in each room, 10 total. Mix these between ancient, shabby, and sci-fi tables. When Gargantua is killed, drop 3 loot from the epic table. So it did give me at least guidance on how much loot I should put in it. So basically, every room you go into should have a piece of loot. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So every room has the potential to have something in it. Even if it's shabby loot, which means it might not be a super cool piece of loot, but you can always kind of find something. Which I really enjoyed. So yeah, I would say that the adventures just... they're weirdly somehow too specific and incredibly vague at the same time. They're basically like somebody... essentially what you get is you kind of get all the flavor of the adventures. So basically having somebody tell you about a cool adventure idea for a really long... for like 20 minutes, but then not tell you how to actually run the adventure. For the most part, like how the nuts and bolts of like what the adventure actually is, what the player characters do when they're in there, and how they do it. So I felt like that was really frustrating. Yeah, and then the same thing in here. Lack of guidance on DCs, how many monsters to put in there, how to like develop the scene, like how do you add the treats, the timers, and how do you make it kind of all fit together? Other things I didn't like, the PCs felt like glass. So they only have 10 hit points, which means they go down real quick. As we found out, like, if you're doing that standard weapon damage, they just get a D6. So a low-level character can take, like, 2 hits, or if they get crit on, maybe they go down in 1 hit. If they're rolling that 12 and they only have 10 hit points. Now, one of the characters I rolled for the loot randomly and had a heartstone right in the beginning of the adventure that they could go grab. It was a cool way to showcase our Zil character, which is a character that's this weird alien that isn't affected by vacuum, so they could actually just get out of their ship and just like swim in the space and go grab the heartstone. So you use the heartstone and you immediately double your hit points. So that character immediately had 20 hit points instead of 10 hit points, which was good. That was the right character for it because they were kind of like the tanky defender. But it felt really, the characters felt like they were very glass, like they were incredibly fragile to me. Like I was like, oh man, if I, like one bad roll can really like send this thing down the drains. Other things that I didn't like, it doesn't really give you any idea. It does a pretty good job with the turn system of covering combat and exploration. Not really any guidance on if you wanted to do some sort of social kind of scene. You're like, okay, talking in action? I guess if I roll effort for it because I'm trying to be persuasive, I guess. Sure. So that was really difficult. And then you're like, how does a countdown timer work in a social scene? Does it deal damage to it? Is it like, oh, we have to do it before the countdown timer comes down, or we're just locked out of the conversation? Like, there's not a lot of guidance for any sort of social thing in the game. So clearly, I think that tells you a lot about ICRPG. Obviously, this, and it makes sense, I think, if you read the system, you look at the art. You don't have a lot of art or anything that's just like 2 people talking to each other or looking at a thing. Everybody's either preparing to do action or in the middle of an action. So with that in mind, it's like, okay, it's just not that style of game. This is which makes sense, and I think that vibes with everything I know about Runehammer. They're very sort of like dungeon delvey, getting in, punching up guys, killing orcs, kicking down doors, picking up cool loot, running away from explosions as the facility explodes kind of game. Like, that's the kind of game this is. But it would be nice to have like some idea, especially if I'm trying to run a longer campaign, how would I do maybe a tense social scene with this setup of the, the threats and the timers and the treats and the how would I set that up? How could I make that work? I would have liked to have an example of how to do that if I wanted to put it in the game. So things I did like. I like the always on initiative. I talked about it already. It makes sure that everybody gets a spot. You don't have that one player who kind of steamrolls over everybody, or like, oh, we can't do anything because we got to wait on the rogue to pick the lock or disarm the traps. So the rest of us are standing around. It's like, if you just stand around, countdown timer goes down. You can at least help if you want to give them like a +3 on their next check or something like that. They're like, okay, I helped them, and then you do the game master thing where you're like, all right, tell me how you're helping them. I understand you're doing it. Like, paint the picture for me. Paint me a word picture. What are you doing to help? Like, and get down on one knee and help them. And, I use the crowbar or whatever to, like, be able to leverage and apply pressure to this one thing, hold open the floor tile so the rogue can disarm the trap that's underneath it. That sort of thing. It's like, okay, cool. Moving on. I like the simplified DCs. And like I already talked about that thing. It's something I ported over to D&D a long time ago. Be like, oh, it's cool to just not have to think about every single action, what the DC could be for that action. So that kind of sets me, if I don't do that beforehand, it leaves me either I don't think of a DC at all, and then they just roll a die, and then I just kind of like gut check it, like vibe check, and be like, yeah, that sounds right. They tell me, oh, I rolled a 16 for my perception check. Be like, yes, that feels like that would see this. Which I feel comfortable doing as an experienced Dungeon Master and Game Master, but I can understand being a new Game Master or Dungeon Master and being like, I don't know, I need some more help. And I think the Simplified Rooms kind of does that, and just be like, yep, that's the DC. Like, don't think about it too much. It's not that hard. It's not that difficult. It's not that important. Just set in, forget it. And then still give you the leeway to, like, change it a little bit if you feel like, oh, this should be more difficult, or no, what you're doing should be easier than that. And changing it that way. And then it also just has things. So there are 3 things you can do as an action on your turn. You can make an attempt. You can do a simple action, which is a thing you don't need to roll for. That's just a thing you do. There are simple So there are simple actions. There are checks, which is our standard, like you try to meet or beat a DC. If you do, it's your binary pass-fail. You either do the thing or you don't. And then there's the third one, which is an attempt, which is the effort mechanic, where things start having hit points for skill types of challenges. So having those simplified DCs in place makes that just framework very easy. Be like, oh, this door is barricaded, closed. How do you want to get it open? It doesn't matter what you try as long as you pitch me as something good idea. And then we make an attempt. If you hit the DC, then yeah, you start working on it and be like, okay, so they had a barricaded door, the door that was barricaded closed. Or like, let's do a locked door. Locked door is easier. Be like, okay, locked door. And the big tough guy's trying to break it down. The smart guy's like, because it's a sci-fi game, opens up the wall panel and sees if he can like get the door to reset to open that way. And the guy with the lock picks is trying to actually like pick the lock on it, and all 3 of these people can work together, and all 3 of them can get the door open in different way. And then whoever gets over the top is the person who gets it over the top of the effort is the person who gets it in. So it's either, the barbarian kicks down the door, the rogue has a click and the lock opens, or your hacker is able to like reset the door and the door just slides open. They're able to reset the system. So it feels really cool, like everybody can attempt to do a thing. We don't have to all sit around and wait for the rogue to pick the lock. Also providing just the effort framework in general is really helpful, being like, and I've done that a little bit in D&D now. I use the effort mechanics in D&D sometimes. But one of the ways that I really like to use it, here's a hot tip for you D&D heads out here, is that if they fail a DC, let's give the prototypical example. I'm a rogue. I tried to pick the lock. Ah, crap! I rolled a 3. Okay, well, you didn't unlock the door. Okay, I tried to unlock the door again. You go, oh, right. So then they put you in a weird spot and be like, oh, well, if they need to get through the door, it doesn't really matter if the door's locked or not, and the rogue is just able to open it. So there's no point. If they need to get through the room, or there's nothing that stops them from trying again and again until they get through the room, they really shouldn't roll for it. But not rolling for it is not fun. You pick the rogue character to do things like pick locks. So instead, taking that DC and then rolling it into effort, and I'll do that sometimes, and be like, okay, so you rolled a 3. Great. The DC was 15. So what we're going to do is we're going to move that over, and it's going to be effort. I'm going to triple that. Effort's now 45. You keep working on it. This is just a complicated luck. It's going to take you more time than you thought. So you've got 3 out of 45 done, which to get a 3, you would have had to roll the next one. Let's say 3 on the die, so you got like a 6. Alright, cool. That's just going to go into the effort. And so you've got 6 of 45. And so, as you guys are standing around waiting for the rogue to pick this lock, rounds go by, wandering monsters can show up. You know, there's a chance you guys are spotted if you're trying to do some skullduggery to see if a random patrol of guards comes by or whatever it is. So I use that effort aspect in D&D as well. And it's a cool way to take a failed check for somebody who's supposed to be good at the thing they're doing and just roll it up and be like, actually, you make progress. You always make progress even if you roll low. But it is just something that's going to take you more time than you expected. This isn't a lock you can just pick in a second. You actually got to work at it. I like the always on timers. I think that's good. I use timers all the time. Usually, by rounds and be like, okay, in rounds this is going to happen. I think maybe I'm going to start putting those in front. Usually, I keep those behind the screen. I usually don't tell the players about them. But, the 2 players really enjoyed having this D4, seeing me watch the D4 and watching it click down every time it comes back to my turn. Wondering what it's going to be, or knowing what it's going to be. So I think they really enjoyed that aspect. And then, like, after something goes off and then I roll the D4 again and then I roll another 1. Like, oh, no, man. The next time it comes up again, jeez. So it's a lot of fun. So I might start putting that out for D&D and making it very clear. Which kind of leads me into my next thing, which is there's a lot of, in ICRPG, there's a lot of like reaching over the screen as a DM and be like, hey, I'm going to clue you into some mechanics here. Come here. This is the bad stuff that's about to happen. Or, good thing you made that save because this thing was going to destroy your item. So, good thing you made that save. There's a lot of being able to just kind of like lean over the screen and kind of like mean mug at the players and being like, man, whew, thank goodness, right? Or, yeah, this thing's, you reach over and be like, this guy's got 4 hearts. They're like, oh god, that's a really tough enemy. Yeah. So having those sorts of abilities, or those moments to be like, here are the mechanics, and having them being able to know the mechanics even on their first time playing, and being like, oh no, this really means something, like mechanically, rather than just having to describe it as being scary or difficult. So I really like that. I really like the mechanics of the rep toys. They're in here. It's really cool. I talked a bit about in the dying part, but there they are. So one of the cool things is to have in the stat block this guy down here, sadistic. If mutant reptoids see an enemy below half its max HP, they will all attack it on their next turn. Even if it's at 0 hit points, at least one of them will continue to hack and bite at the body for 1d4 rounds. So having a character that gets knocked down and then having a stat block where I can just like show him the stat block, just read it out to him and be like, oh, no, usually a monster would just leave you alone. But this guy just turns and starts trying to rip apart your unconscious body. And then on top of that, doing the escalating damage as they did it. Because there's no way that this mutant reptoid, even if he's using his claws, which inflict magical damage, which is only a d8, he'll never be able to do negative 20 hit points in a round. So that kind of takes out the threat. So basically, this sadistic thing just kind of turns into oh, this guy just kind of stops attacking people in combat, which doesn't feel like what you were trying to, not the fantasy you were trying to create with this effect. But if they can't actually do meaningful harm to the downed creature, they are just kind of getting distracted. So it's nice. I enjoyed it. That's a fun thing. I gotta have, yeah, have a good one. Thanks for dropping in, guys. So yeah, let's see. And the last thing I want to talk about is the loot shotgun. It was really nice having a game unlike D&D, which sometimes doesn't really give you a lot of guidance on how to put out loot, to have it right there in the adventure and be like, oh, you basically give out one piece of loot per room, and you have these tables of loot. Pull up. Hero Origins, Hero Roller, Monster Roller, loot. Loot tables. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 D100 loot table rolls, which is cool. So there was always stuff to be given out. And some of it's like, this epic loot is really, really powerful stuff. So you know when they fight a big enemy, you'd be like, alright, they get some really cool stuff from a really nasty enemy. If we're running the sci-fi things, they get these cool sci-fi things. Let's grab one at random. The Hagro Biscuit. Number 65. Food. Heal all allies near you for 1d12. So you guys all share this, like, this super biscuit ration, and you all heal. Packed with vitamins and electrolytes. It's what plants crave. The Cursed Loot Table. Let's go 87. Ray of Death. Trap. Make a con check or be instantly reduced to 0 hit points by a black ray of magic. Oh no. So you pick up a magic item, boom, something goes off. This thing's trapped. So not all loot's good, but they want loot, and they'll always pick up loot because loot's how you advance in the game. And you won't know about it till you pick it up. And then Shabby Loot is just like random stuff you find. We'll do 12. How about that? Climber Spikes. Item. Climb a route as normal. Any who follow, roll easy. So it allows you to trailblaze, which is really cool. You get a coin box that has 3d12 coins in it. Canvas Tarp. Item. Durable cloth square, near, long on each side. What are you going to do with the canvas tarp? It's up to you. Like, this is a common item. I love stuff like this because it really kind of pushes players to be clever. Okay, you have a piece of canvas. You have a canvas tarpaulin. What are you going to do with that? You come up with some shenanigans and pitch it to me. The Worn Longbow, number 32. Weapon. Has a 10% chance of breaking when used. Because it's, you know, old and worn. Really cool stuff. I was going to see if I could find some of the fun stuff that... well... I can tell you some of the stuff I had in there. I had a servo winch in there that allowed them to pull very heavy objects, and I threw it in the same room that there is an automated battle droid that I added in there, because really there's only 2 rooms in the adventure as written that have monsters in it, which feels weird. It feels like if I didn't put more monsters in the adventure, like the adventure would just be over so quickly, because there's nothing to really challenge the players other than the solar flares, and they only do 1 point of damage at a time. But I also have a healer who has the ability to do 8 hit points or better, because he has an exploding thing that allows his d8s to explode, so he can re-roll his d8 and add the totals together, which means that he could pretty easily heal one member of the party of the duo in a round and keep them at max hit points while the other one just kind of does the other stuff, because the other character's got all the intelligence. So it was like, I felt like I needed to put some monsters in there to like kind of give them something to do. Otherwise, they just kind of walk up to things. I do a check about it, which is kind of boring. So again, why I don't think the adventure is very good. I felt like I had to do a bunch of work, almost to the point that I basically kind of made somebody else's adventure, is what it felt like I was doing. It was like, if I'm making somebody else's adventure, shouldn't I just make my own? But but yeah, had the heavy winch in there with an auto droid, battle droid in there. So I was like, yeah, they could get up to some shenanigans as a big battle droid if they wanted to like hook this thing up and like and it's in the docking bay, which is really cool. So it's in the docking bay, so it's like there is a potential. It's like if you really want to do some shenanigans where you hook that thing up the battle droid, and then hooked up the other side of the winch to your actual ship that you're boarding from, and have the pilot just pull away and just like rip this battle droid out of the ship. I was like, that could be a cool thing you do. There's lots of things. It's just like this game is very messy and be like, just get silly with it. Just do all sorts of weird stuff. Did that. There's a spacer ready. So I made these SREs, which are military or meal ready eats. But they were spacer ready eats. They're just MREs, space MREs that allow you to heal. The huzzah thing I talked about, the tabard was in there. They found some battle armor. I put some battle armor in there that would give them a +3 to their AC, but it didn't have its power cell was all used, so they had to figure out how to get power to it. They could take a power cell out of one of their guns, because only one of their guns uses a power cell, and stick it in there, or I just left it open. It was like they could find a power cell somewhere else. And I told them, oh, well, in that turret you destroyed, there's a chance, the turret that I had to add in again into the adventure, and there's probably a power cell in that thing. Like, oh, we'll run back and grab that and we'll go put it in the... So they're trying to do that in the middle of a combat too, which was interesting. Watch them kind of run across the ship to try to go get this power cell and run back to the battle armor to try to like plug it in. Yeah, so there's lots of cool stuff in there. There was some nav stuff that wasn't going to be helpful for them, but in a one-shot would have been helpful, like if we continued those adventures on with those characters, that would be helpful for them using their ship. But as far as that, so I like adding some of that stuff into adventures too, and being like, oh, well, if you guys ever want to come back and play these characters, you could use this cool loot that I'm giving you, but it's not going to be super useful for this one shot. Always try to, whenever I run a one shot, try to entice them to want to come back and play these characters again, even if I have absolutely zero plans for them to ever run these characters or ever run this thing again. Just to be like, up, here's a little carrot. I'm just gonna dangle it out here, you know, maybe I'll look this way. If you grab it, you grab it. You grab it? You wanna play these characters? But I mean, we're going back to our normal campaign. But they enjoyed it. And I would definitely run this again. I had a lot of fun with ICRPG. The players had a lot of fun. They loved how fast it was. Once I started showing them some of the other sample adventures in here, because I was telling them, I was like, oh, by the way, it doesn't just do sci-fi. We just played the sci-fi scenario. But, which we'll do in the world primers here. In the primers, the second edition comes with 2 different settings, but there are more. Kingdoms of Valheim, which is your standard fantasy. And it kind of gives you some ideas about what's going on in Valheim, if you want to play in that world. And then Warp Shell, which is what we were playing, which is the sci-fi one. It gives you some ideas. So there's a Zill. That's what one of my players is playing. One of those kind of critters. They're weird. Kind of show it off, you know, if you want to play in that world or not. And we saw the thing in the, I think it's How to Play. I thought it was the thing with the cards. Where were they? Where were the cards? I don't remember where the cards were. Anyways, the thing with the cards where you can use cards instead of dice, because I said there was a Weird West setting. There's a Weird West setting. One of these adventures, we can just jump to the adventures. So one of these adventures in here wouldn't work for actually either one of the settings they give you. So the nice thing is that there's a bunch of adventures in here. The bad thing is that the adventures are not great because of all the reasons I've already listed. So you have the sci-fi one, the Red Sword, which is a classic. You go into a derelict spaceship that's had a rescue beacon that's going off, and then stop going off, and then there's signs of life on the ship. You need to check them out, see if there's anybody to save, and then they have all the mutants. The Doom Vault, which is classic D&D kind of fare. Speed Kills, which is like a Mad Max death race kind of thing. You fly all these these junkers and stuff, and you have different pilots that you're going up against. The Eye of Set, which is again another very, very standard kind of dark fantasy dungeon crawler. Zombies. The Gorgon. Beneath the door. Beneath the door is the one that doesn't fit the other settings, because this is actually like a Call of Cthulhu kind of thing. So it kind of makes you go, what classes would I use for this? Because the classes are built for either Alfheim or Warp Shell. So you either get sci-fi classes or fantasy classes, and neither necessarily work here super well, but also both could work here. If you wanted to make everybody... Okay, well, obviously this takes place in jolly old... I was going to say London, I think. No, it takes place in New Hampshire. So this takes place in the real world, so you're all going to play humans. But you can pick from any of the classes, which I think works generally. Like, you could be a priest, you could be a guy with a gun, you could be a guy with a sword, I guess, if you wanted to be. It would be a little weird, but maybe you're like the last living Templar or something like that, and so you still walk around with like medieval armor and arms, and you have a magical sword and shit like that. So it could be a lot of fun. And there's some more stuff in here. We're at Planet Killer, which is a 2-part adventure. All of Arnor. This is one that's really cool because it's got like mechs in it. You get some mech rules if you want to do stuff like that. The Fall of Arnor Foes, and then, like I said, it's a 2-parter, which is, here's the second part, Death on Krell. Rolling deckhands, using space fighters. So if you want to do some vehicle combat, they've got vehicle combat in there, and they kind of give you the banana scale for the size of things here. And just lots of cool tables. Locations, objects, goals, hero roller, hero origins, monster roller. Like if you want to put monsters together, make custom monsters, here's a way to do that. Really cool. So it's a really cool system. If you have never played it before, I'd say go grab it. Like I said, there are free rules for it. We can go ahead and do that. You can go to Runehammer. I'm going to look it up. I think it's runehammer.com. But let's see if I have to eat my words. Ugh. It's not runehammer.com. Runehammer.game? You know what? I'm just going to look it up. Oh, it's runehammer.online. Sorry. Oh. I guess they have a Philly shop now. Cool. He's in Philadelphia. That's cool. I didn't know he had a shop. He has a newer game out too as well, called Crown and Skull, that is also very well received. And it's a different style of game. Like I said, it's really great. It has really cool. It's cool how his mind works, how he comes at sort of establish things and kind of puts a new twist on it, different mechanics, and different ways to do things that are mechanics that you will put in front of your face, in front of the players, and instead of hiding it like D&D. Often we try to do it with D&D and be like, oh, well, that's the mechanic, but how do we make it look narrative-wise? Instead of just being like, nope, you just know the DCs and what you're trying to hit, and that way you can spend all your focus on that, focusing on how to make the narrative and describing it. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a great game. So check it out if you haven't. Like I said, you can go get the free rules for the new rules, the updated rules. So not what I was running, but it's going to work very similarly. You can also try out their new game, Crown and Skull. Has good reviews. I don't know too much about it, but yeah, check it out. Fun stuff. Let's see. Custom. One second. Got something on here. Crown and Skull. No hit points, no stats. Explore the innovative new attrition system where your gear and skills are all you've got. That's for Crown and Skull. So if you want to see something that's doing something a little bit different, go check it out. But that's it for the stream. thanks for hanging out with me, guys. This was a lot of fun. Took a little bit longer, but I wanted to get through both of these things. I thought it would be a fun thing. So yeah, that's it. We'll do this again. So make sure you come out and check us out. Subscribe if you haven't. We'll see that. Give a little like on the video, a little engagement. Drop any comments. I think if you played ICRPG, I want to know your thoughts. If you had the same thoughts as me, tell me if you've run one of these adventures, by the way, and how they worked out for you. For me, I felt like I really had to remake the adventure, but maybe other people have. Maybe people really like that. I just thought it was really hard as somebody who's trying to run the system cold, being like, I still have to like make an adventure, which I wasn't really planning to do. I didn't really have the time for. I assumed when the book came with adventures in it, and I picked one I liked, and they're like, oh, you should start with this adventure. Cool, I want to do sci-fi anyway, so this will work. And then being like, oh, this adventure's not really ready to run. I still have to do a whole bunch of work for it. But maybe that wasn't, maybe you liked that aspect of it. Maybe it was purely a time thing for me, but I wish I had more of a fleshed out example to run off of it, rather than feeling like I had to really wing it from the first part when I'm already feeling like I'm winging the rules. Oh yeah. Try it if you haven't. Like I said, there's a free PDF to download. And let me know your thoughts, whether you liked it or not, what you liked or not, and see if we're on the same page. Maybe not. Maybe you like something I didn't like, or maybe you don't like something I liked. The system. Let me know why, and we'll talk about it a little bit. But that's it for me. See you guys next time, alright? Bye-bye.